Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, despite its atmosphere and visual brilliance, left out many important details from the book. Today, I'll walk you through the moments that were left behind and are only known to those who've read the novel. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Snape completely lost his composure. For those familiar with the films, Severus Snape appears to be a complex, brooding, but ultimately noble figure. However, the book shows us a more vicious and biting side of Snape. He obsessively pursued Lupin and Sirius, crossing all boundaries in his mockery of the werewolf professor. And while the movie portrays him as heroically shielding the students from danger, in the book his behavior is entirely different. He bursts into the hospital wing in a fit of rage, spitting accusations at Harry and Hermione. This version of Snape starkly contrasts with the controlled, nearly tragic image presented on screen. Number 2. Quidditch. The Harry Potter films generally avoided focusing too much on Quidditch. The scenes were too labor-intensive to shoot. In Prisoner of Azkaban, we see only one game, and that's the end of the sports storyline. But in the book, Harry plays the entire season and ends up winning the Quidditch Cup. One scene even became legendary. Draco Malfoy and his friends dressed up as Dementors to scare Harry, only to be blasted by his powerful Patronus right on the field. Number 3. The Firebolt. In the film, we see Harry lose his Nimbus 2000 and receive a new broom, the Firebolt, from Sirius only at the very end. It's simple and cinematic, but the book tells a different story. Harry receives the Firebolt at Christmas, but with no note or sender information. Hermione, suspecting that Sirius Black might have sent it, reports it to Professor McGonagall. The broom is confiscated for inspection, and Harry is deeply offended by Hermione, refusing to speak to her for quite some time. Number 4. Harry's father was an animagus. When Harry summons the mighty silver stag, Patronus, it's a heroic moment. But the film never explains why it's a stag. Book readers know James Potter was an animagus who could transform into a stag. It's not just a striking image, it's a magical connection between father and son. The movie shows that Peter and Sirius were animagi, but doesn't explain why. The book clarifies it. James's friends learned to become animagi to accompany Lupin during his werewolf transformations, keeping him company and staying safe themselves. Number 5. The Marauders. The film shows the Weasley twins giving Harry the Marauders map, a fascinating and magically advanced object. But it never explains how Professor Lupin knew how to use it instantly. In the book, it all makes sense. Lupin was one of the Marauders, known as Moony. He co-created the map with Peter, Wormtail, Sirius, Padfoot, and James, Prongs. This is a powerful emotional link between Harry and his father, but the movie completely omits the backstory of the map's creators. Number 6. Crookshanks and Sirius were friends. In the movie, Hermione's cat, Crookshanks, plays a minor role, mostly chasing Ron's rat. But in the book, he's practically a full-fledged character. From the start, he distrusts Scabbers, unsurprising, as he was really Peter Pettigrew, and soon befriends the giant black dog, Sirius Black. Their unlikely friendship was so strong that fans developed a theory. Perhaps Crookshanks once belonged to the Potters and recognized an old friend. Number 7. Harry spent weeks at the Leaky Cauldron. After running away from the Dursleys, the film quickly moves Harry to Hogwarts. But in the book, he spends several weeks living at the Leaky Cauldron. It's a rare moment of comfort and freedom for Harry. He strolls through Diagon Alley, explores shops, and watches adult wizards go about their lives. This episode shows just how different the magical world is from life on Privet Drive, making the contrast between Harry's two worlds all the more striking. Number 8. The truth about Professor Trelawney's prophecy. Professor Trelawney was easy to laugh at, floating scarves, trembling voice, constant talk of doom. In the film, she's little more than a comic distraction. But in the book, something chilling happens during Harry's divination exam. After he turns to leave, she suddenly stiffens. Her voice drops, deep, echoing, nothing like her usual self. And then she speaks a prophecy. Not the vague, dreamy kind, a real one. The Dark Lord's servant will break free and rejoin his master tonight. Harry freezes. He doesn't know what he's just heard. Not fully, but it shakes him. Later, Dumbledore confirms it. This is only the second real prophecy Trelawney has ever made. The first was about Harry and Voldemort. And now this. It's not nonsense. It's a warning, a key to understanding why things are shifting, why Sirius is in danger, why Peter Pettigrew must not escape. And it all started in a dusty tower classroom with a prophecy no one expected. The film cuts the scene entirely. No trance, no dark prediction, no realization that divination, for all its silliness, just cracked open the future. The book doesn't treat it lightly. It plants the fear early and lets it grow. And it gives Professor Trelawney something the movie never does. A moment of power. A moment of truth. Hidden under layers of shawls and sherry. Number 9. Harry met Cho Chang for the first time. Before the Yule Ball, before the kiss, before the heartbreak, there was a match. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry sees Cho Chang for the first time, not as a date or a mystery, but as a rival on the Quidditch pitch. She's the Ravenclaw seeker, fast, focused, and Harry notices her, not just her flying. The book says plainly he noticed that she was very pretty. That was it. A glance, a flicker, but it stayed with him. During the match, Cho gives him a real challenge. She's quick, smart, and doesn't play dirty like Malfoy. Harry respects that. He even struggles to stay focused, not just because of Dementors circling the stadium, but because he's aware of her in a way that's new and real. She wasn't just another student anymore. She had a name, a face, a presence. That moment on the field was their beginning. The film skipped it. In the movies, Cho appears suddenly in Goblet of Fire, already the center of Harry's awkward attention. But in the books, their story had a quieter start. Just a boy noticing a girl who could fly. It made their future, the crush, the nerves, the heartbreak, feel more natural. Because before Cho was the girl Harry asked out, she was the girl who almost beat him to the snitch. Number 10. Ron stood up for Hermione against Snape. In the films, Ron Weasley is often the comic relief, nervous, clumsy, always with a mouthful of food. But the books show a different Ron, loyal, fierce, and ready to speak up when it matters. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor Snape mocks Hermione during a defense against the dark arts class. She answers a question, marked correctly of course, and he snaps, "You insufferable know-it-all." The classroom goes quiet. Hermione turns red, and before Harry can even react, Ron slams his hand on the desk. "You asked her a question and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told?" The room holds its breath. Snape's eyes flash. Ron is given detention, but he doesn't take it back. Not a word. Hermione is stunned, grateful, but silent. The book doesn't turn it into a grand moment. It just happens. Quick, honest, brave. It's not the kind of scene that makes it into a movie, but it's the kind that defines a friendship. And Ron, number 11, how Sirius escaped from Azkaban. The film shows Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban as a vague miracle, a blink-and-you-miss-it moment. He was there and then he was gone. No one explains how he did it. But in the book we get the truth, and it's brilliant. Sirius used what few others could, his animagus form. As a large black dog, he could slip through the bars, but more importantly, the Dementors couldn't sense him properly. They couldn't see him, the book says. They couldn't feel his thoughts, only emotions. And Sirius, by then, felt almost nothing but a thin, burning hatred. The moment that changed everything came from a newspaper. The Daily Prophet ran a photo of the Weasley family in Egypt, a smiling shot, harmless, ordinary, but Sirius saw a rat, a very familiar rat. On Ron's shoulder sat Scabbers, the same rat he had seen 12 years ago on Peter Pettigrew's finger, and that's when it clicked. Peter was alive, hiding in plain sight, near Harry, near Hogwarts. That tiny spark of rage and purpose was all Sirius needed. He began transforming in his cell, slipping through the bars in dog form. He grew thinner, hungrier, but never stopped. The guards didn't suspect. No one did. When the chance came, he swam through the icy sea, surrounding Azkaban, and vanished into the storm. That escape wasn't just clever, it was fueled by grief, injustice, and a silent promise to James, "I'll protect your son. I'll finish what you couldn't." None of this made it into the movie. There, Sirius is just a shadow, an escapee, a threat. But in the book, he's something far more tragic and dangerous, a man who spent 12 years in hell with nothing but the memory of betrayal and the face of a rat, keeping him alive. Number 12. Why the werewolf attacked Sirius. The moon rose and Remus Lupin changed. Bones twisted, skin stretched, a howl cut the air. In the film, it happens fast. He turns and lunges at Sirius Black like a wild animal. No warning, no reason. But the book gives us the truth. Lupin didn't take his wolfsbane potion that day. He forgot. In all the shock of discovering that Peter Pettigrew was alive, that Sirius was innocent, that everything he believed had been turned upside down, he simply forgot. The wolfsbane potion wasn't a cure, but it let him keep his mind. When taken properly, it allowed a werewolf to transform without becoming a monster. He would still change, still suffer, but remain in control. But missing even one dose meant surrendering to the beast completely. Lupin knew this. Snape brewed the potion for him every month. It was dangerous, complex, bitter, but it worked. Until that night in the shrieking shack, when everything went wrong. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, the moment is quiet, just a mention from Lupin afterward. "I had not taken my potion," he tells Dumbledore. "I forgot." That line carries the weight of guilt and terror. He knew what could happen, and it did. He turned on his closest friend, Sirius, and almost killed him. The werewolf did not know loyalty, only hunger, pain, instinct. It was a horror Lupin had spent his whole life trying to avoid, and it caught up to him in the worst moment possible. The film reduces it to spectacle, a sudden transformation, a chase into the forest, but the book shows the deeper tragedy. Lupin isn't just cursed, he's human. He forgets, he falters, and when he does, people suffer. That's what makes his story so heartbreaking. Not the monster he becomes, but the man he tries to be. Number 13, the real identity of Sir Cadogan. After the fat lady's portrait was slashed by Sirius Black, Gryffindor Tower was left without its usual guardian. That's when Sir Cadogan arrived, sword drawn, visor shining, and ego the size of a Hungarian horntail. Only readers of The Prisoner of Azkaban know him well. He was no ordinary portrait. He charged into duty with wild excitement, announcing, "A quest! The Gryffindor password is Cadogan's to keep." But his methods? Utter chaos. Sir Cadogan changed the password several times a day. He challenged students to duels in the hallway. He galloped between frames on his fat grey pony, yelling riddles and quoting made-up prophecies. It wasn't long before the entire house was groaning at the sound of his name. Ron called him barking mad. Seamus muttered that he'd rather sleep in the Great Hall than argue with a portrait every night. But McGonagall, in her stern logic, said it was safer than leaving the entrance unguarded. Then came the disaster. One night, Sirius Black got in, not by brute force, not by magic, but because he had the password. A small slip of parchment, lost by none other than Neville Longbottom. Cadogan, ever the loyal fool, let him in. "He had the password. Of course I let him through, noble sir," he explained proudly when questioned. That mistake nearly cost lives, yet no one could stay angry, and Cadogan was too ridiculous to hate. The movies left him out completely. No pony, no clanking armor, no absurd speeches about valor and fire-breathing foes. They missed the comic relief, yes, but more than that, they missed the tension, because in the books, even a silly painting could hold life or death consequences. Number 14, the story of Neville Longbottom's parents. In Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban, the film never mentions one of the darkest, most haunting stories hidden in the book. The fate of Neville Longbottom's parents. Yet in the novel, this truth hits like a thunderclap. During a casual scene in Diagon Alley, readers hear the whispers of what really happened to Frank and Alice Longbottom. They weren't just anyone, they were celebrated auras, fighters in the First Wizarding War, loyal, brave, and then tortured into madness by none other than Bellatrix Lestrange. The horror wasn't just in what was done, it was in how it was done. Bellatrix, with Rodolphus and Rabastan Lestrange, along with Barty Crouch Jr., used the Cruciatus Curse over and over again until Frank and Alice no longer recognized their own son. "They were very popular," said Professor Lupin quietly, in the shadows of the classroom. "The Longbottoms never gave in, not once." That single line reveals a tragedy worse than death, the ultimate price of defiance. Neville visits them in St. Mungo's, though this detail appears only in Order of the Phoenix. But even in Prisoner of Azkaban, the weight of their story lingers in the air like smoke. Lupin knows, Dumbledore knows, and now Harry begins to understand. Neville isn't just the forgetful boy who loses his toad, he's the son of war heroes, a child raised by his stern grandmother because the people who loved him most were shattered beyond repair. The films robbed Neville of this layer. In the books, he's not comic relief. He's a survivor. His quiet courage doesn't come from talent or fame. It comes from legacy. From a memory not of glory, but of pain. And yet, like Harry, Neville carries on, not because it's easy, but because he must. Number 15, the first meeting with Sirius in human form. Of all the moments that distinguish Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban as a novel rather than a mere adaptation, none is more gripping, more emotionally charged than Harry's first true encounter with Sirius Black in human form. It is a moment of revelation, fury, and aching truth, not rushed like in the film, but simmering in dread, uncertainty, and the slow unraveling of a history buried by betrayal. This pivotal scene, hidden from those who only know the movie, takes place in the Shrieking Shack, a setting as haunted by secrets as the man who waits within it. The Shrieking Shack, described in the book as the most haunted building in Britain, becomes a crucible of emotion when Harry, Ron, and Hermione find themselves dragged into its decrepit walls after a violent and confusing encounter with the grim-like dog, who, as it turns out, is not a dog at all. The transformation from beast to man is not the triumphant reveal of a misunderstood godfather. It is the appearance of a man who has suffered more than most can comprehend. Sirius Black, for the first time in his human form, is skeletal, ragged, and wild-eyed. He is not presented as a misunderstood savior. He is dangerous, he is hunted, and Harry, at that moment, is ready to kill him. Harry's emotions are a maelstrom. This is the man he believes has betrayed his parents, the man whose treachery led to their murder at the hands of Voldemort. Rowling does not rush this confrontation. She lets it breathe, lets it sting. There is no comforting light or gentle reunion, there is only fury. Harry, trembling with rage, has his wand pointed directly at Sirius. He demands answers, but he doesn't really expect any. He expects a fight, a confession, perhaps even blood. Sirius's appearance in this scene is unforgettable, and Rowling crafts his physical condition with haunting detail. His face was waxy and gaunt, and the skin stretched tightly over his bones. His eyes were sunken but burning with a manic light. This is not the face of a murderer caught in triumph, but a man eroded by time, consumed by grief and injustice. The air is thick with tension, and even Hermione, known for her clarity and composure, hesitates in confusion. Ron is injured, Harry is boiling over, yet Sirius, though clearly desperate, is not hostile. He speaks carefully, sparingly choosing his words like a man with little time to fix everything. The truth begins to unspool slowly like thread pulled from a web of long-held lies. The tension escalates when Professor Lupin storms into the room. Unlike the film, where revelations come in quick bursts, the book allows Lupin's arrival to deepen the mystery. He looks at Sirius with recognition, but not fear. And when he turns his wand on Harry and demands to know why they have the Marauder's map, that magical parchment that reveals every corner of Hogwarts. The weight of the moment grows unbearable. Lupin and Sirius are old friends, Harry learns. They embrace, not the reaction one expects between a murderer and a teacher. And now Harry's anger turns to disbelief. He feels betrayed anew. "I trusted you," Harry says to Lupin, and those words land like blows. But it is in this scene that Rowling begins the delicate art of revelation, revealing not only the truth of what happened on the night James and Lily died, but the real identity of the traitor among them. The scene pulses with shifting loyalties. As the narrative develops, it becomes clear that Sirius is not the man he was thought to be. The betrayal did not come from him, but from Peter Pettigrew, a name that, until that moment, felt like a ghost from a forgotten past. Pettigrew, the friend, the coward, the true traitor, had lived in hiding for 12 years as Ron's pet rat, Scabbers. This twist is delivered with masterful build-up, leading to the moment Sirius screams, "He's in this room." Not as madness, but as revelation. The weight of Sirius's imprisonment, his escape, and his pursuit of justice becomes clearer with every line. He never had a trial. He was thrown into Azkaban on suspicion alone, held captive with the Dementors for over a decade, surrounded by the screams of the damned, losing his mind day by day. And yet, as the truth comes into focus, Sirius is not driven by revenge. He is driven by the love he still holds for James and Lily, a love that transcends the years, the pain, and the betrayal. When Sirius turns to Harry, finally, after the truths have begun to settle, he offers him something profound. A future. Not a vengeance pact, but a home. "I'm your godfather," he tells Harry, and for the first time there is a flicker of something warmer than fury in Harry's heart. It is not acceptance yet, but it is the beginning of understanding. And for Harry, who has lived unloved and unwanted for so long, that idea is as foreign as it is precious. In the film, this emotional arc is compressed into a brief reunion, but in the book, it is a slow and powerful reckoning. The scene in the Shrieking Shack is not just about clearing Sirius's name, it is about confronting Harry's deepest beliefs, challenging everything he thought he knew about loyalty and betrayal. Rowling writes it with such precision that the reader can feel every breath, every heartbeat, every glance exchanged between friends who thought they'd never see each other again. Sirius is not perfect. He is bitter, impulsive, and broken by what he has endured, but he is also noble. When offered the chance to kill Pettigrew, the man who destroyed everything he loved, he does not act alone. He asks Harry's permission. He allows Harry to decide. And Harry, despite all the rage in his chest, chooses mercy. "I don't reckon my dad would have wanted them to become killers." "Just for you," he says, stopping Sirius and Lupin in their tracks. It is a moment of grace, made all the more powerful by the pain that precedes it. Number 16. Hermione slapped Malfoy. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban holds many unforgettable moments, but some of its most powerful scenes live solely within the pages of J.K. Rowling's original book. One such moment, often unknown to those who only watched the film, reveals a side of Hermione Granger, rarely shown so vividly. In the film, Hermione threatens Draco Malfoy with her wand, and he retreats. But in the book, the scene is electric, with emotional intensity and physical action. It is not just a confrontation, it's an eruption, a spontaneous flash of righteous fury. Hermione doesn't speak, she doesn't warn, she simply acts, and in doing so she forever changes the way we see her. It begins on the school grounds near Hagrid's hut, as tension brews in the air. Buckbeak the Hippogriff, a proud magical creature introduced earlier that year in Care of Magical Creatures, has been sentenced to death. The injustice of the decision weighs heavily on Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The three friends have grown close to Hagrid, who is inconsolable at the verdict. And behind this cruelty, behind the cold swing of bureaucracy's axe, stands one name, Lucius Malfoy. But Draco, his son, seems almost gleeful about the outcome. As the trio makes their way toward Hagrid's hut, they spot Draco and his usual entourage, Vincent Crabbe, and Gregory Goyle. Their presence is rarely a sign of anything good. Draco's smirk appears even before he speaks, as if he knows exactly which buttons to press. He begins to mock Buckbeak, exaggerating the way the creature supposedly attacked him. "Didn't you know?" he sneers. "Father says Buckbeak's a dangerous beast. Should have been put down long ago." There's a calculated cruelty in his words. He is not just taunting Harry or Ron. He is twisting the knife into the heart of Hagrid's grief. The insult hits its mark. Ron turns red, Harry clenches his fists. But it's Hermione who responds. And not with her usual logic or reason, not with a clever spell, not even with a scolding. For once, words are not enough. There is a crack in the armor of control she always wears. Her hand flies up. Time seems to stop. And then, in one swift, clean motion, her palm connects with Draco Malfoy's cheek. There's no warning, no witty remark, just the sharp sound of skin against skin and the stunned silence that follows. Even Crabbe and Goyle seem uncertain for a heartbeat, unsure if they should laugh, run, or retaliate. But Malfoy, the ever-arrogant, ever-sneering Prince of Slytherin, stumbles backward, his eyes wide with disbelief. He clutches his cheek, not from pain, but from shock. Hermione Granger has slapped him. The moment is described in the book with delicious clarity. Rowling writes, Hermione had snatched up her bag and marched towards Malfoy. She had raised her hand and slapped Malfoy across the face with all the strength she could muster. The fact that she didn't use magic makes it even more powerful. She could have hexed him, she could have used any number of jinxes, but she didn't. It was a human response, raw, visceral, and deeply personal. For fans of the book, this scene has become iconic. It is not just about physical retaliation, it is about justice. It is about standing up to bullies in a way that transcends spells and wands. Hermione, who had so often been the voice of reason and restraint, reaches a breaking point, and when she does, it is glorious. In that slap is all the frustration she has carried. From Malfoy's jibes about Muggleborns, from his constant attacks on Harry, from his smug delight in others' pain. Malfoy doesn't fight back. He doesn't even try. He turns and flees, humiliated in front of his henchmen and stripped of his usual bravado. For once, he is silenced. And it isn't because of magic. It's because of Hermione Granger, the girl he underestimated, the girl he mocked for her heritage, her intelligence, and her courage. The scene ripples through the narrative like a tremor. Ron's stunned admiration is evident. Harry's delight is barely concealed. And even Hagrid, though distracted by the looming execution, seems to appreciate what happened. It is as if, for one brief moment, the natural order has been corrected, the arrogant have been brought low, the silent have roared. Hermione, the rule follower, the perfectionist, the one who always did her homework, has just committed the most unapologetic act of rebellion. This moment does not make it into the film. Instead, audiences are given a toned-down version. Hermione draws her wand and Draco backs away. It's still satisfying, but it lacks the raw emotion of the original. It lacks the spontaneity, the fire, the sheer unexpectedness of that slap. On screen she is still measured, still in control. But in the book, we see something else. Something deeper. A crack in the dam. It is one of the rare times in the series where Hermione acts from pure instinct. She doesn't calculate, she doesn't pause, she doesn't consult a book or a professor. She simply reacts, and her reaction is all the more powerful because of who she is. This isn't Harry, the reckless Gryffindor. It isn't Ron, quick to temper. It's Hermione. And that makes all the difference. The moment speaks to the complexity of her character. She is not just a brain. She is not just a sidekick. She is a person with emotions, loyalties, and a deep sense of right and wrong. And in this moment, she shows that she will defend her friend, not with spells or clever words, but with a courage as old as time, the courage to face down cruelty, the courage to risk her reputation, the courage to act when no one else dares to. Number 17, Buckbeak was saved thanks to time travel. When readers speak of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, they often recall the twisted branches of the Whomping Willow, the haunting figures of Dementors gliding across the lake, or the shocking revelation that Sirius Black is not the villain they believed him to be. The film adaptation captured the grandeur of those moments, drenching them in cinematic flair. Yet buried deep in the pages of J.K. Rowling's third installment lies a segment so rich in suspense, so masterfully constructed in pacing and logic, that it unfolds like a magical detective thriller. It is the rescue of Buckbeak the Hippogriff, a feat that only the readers of the book can truly appreciate in its full complexity. Buckbeak's fate was sealed the moment Draco Malfoy allowed his arrogance to provoke the proud creature. Injured and humiliated, Draco ensured his father, Lucius Malfoy, pressed charges that led to an official order of execution. Hagrid, heartbroken but resigned, prepared to say goodbye. In the film, Buckbeak's escape seems like a minor event, a cut of a rope, a flash of wings, and he is gone. But the novel paints an entirely different story, woven with risk, precision, and the dangerous power of time travel. Time, in the wizarding world, is not to be meddled with. That is made very clear when Professor McGonagall first entrusts Hermione with the Time Turner at the beginning of the school year, allowing her to attend overlapping classes. It is a device of immense magical potential, closely guarded by the Ministry. The stakes for misusing it are high, and yet, in a moment of sheer desperation and brilliance, Dumbledore makes a quiet suggestion that perhaps time could be bent just once to correct an injustice. It is this very moment that launches Harry and Hermione into one of the most intricate and perilous adventures in the series. The plan was not just to save Sirius Black, unjustly imprisoned for 12 years in Azkaban, but to also ensure the survival of Buckbeak. But how does one change the past without being seen, without interfering with their own timeline? The executioner, McNair, was already on his way. Fudge was arriving. The clock was ticking. Not metaphorically, but literally. The brilliance of Rowling's storytelling lies in how she constructs this scene. Harry and Hermione must move silently, hidden in the shadows of events they themselves had just lived through. They must dodge not only people but themselves. As they step out of the hospital wing and into the past, they become unseen spectators of a world they had just left. "We're breaking about 50 school rules," Hermione mutters, but the gravity of their mission demands more than obedience to regulations. They begin by hiding in the trees near Hagrid's hut. The detail with which Rowling builds this scene is extraordinary. The two characters crouch among leaves, timing their actions with surgical precision. They cannot act too soon or too late. They see their past selves enter Hagrid's hut, 3 shadows through the window, and hold their breath. Every footstep, every knock on the door must happen as it had before. A deviation could unravel everything. The suspense is tangible. They watch Fudge and Dumbledore walk down the path. McNair, dragging the gleaming axe behind him, is close behind. There is no room for error. In a single breathless moment, as their past selves walk away with Hagrid, and the officials linger at the door, Hermione sprints forward. She deftly unhooks Buckbeak's chain. The creature snorts but remains calm. Harry is ready, clutching a dead ferret to coax the hippogriff. They lead him into the woods just in time. This scene, barely acknowledged in the film, is a masterpiece in the book. It's not just about freeing a creature, it's about timing, secrecy, understanding the flow of events, and never letting yourself be seen. The risk is monumental. If McNair had turned a second too soon, if Buckbeak had made noise, if their past selves had seen them, it would have been catastrophic. But the rescue of Buckbeak was only part of the mission. The true goal, kindly the liberation of Sirius Black, required even greater precision. As darkness fell over the Hogwarts grounds and the moon rose above the Forbidden Forest, Harry and Hermione made their way back to the castle. They had to wait. They had to watch. From the cover of the trees they saw their earlier selves encounter the Dementors by the lake. Here lies another detail overlooked by the film. As Harry watches his past self collapse under the weight of despair, he anticipates the arrival of his father. The silver stag Patronus that had saved him earlier, he believed, had come from James Potter, back from the dead. It was only as the moment replayed itself before him that he realized the truth. "It was me," he whispered. "I saw myself conjuring the Patronus before." In a moment of pure instinct and courage, Harry steps forward and casts the Patronus that drives the Dementors away, saving not only his past self, but Sirius as well. The book ties this moment of realization with one of personal growth. The Patronus is a spell of hope, light, and conviction. Harry had never before been able to conjure a full Patronus, not until he knew he already had. Rowling's play on time is philosophical. Harry could only achieve this level of magic because he had seen himself do it. The causality is circular, but in that circle lies one of the most profound revelations of the series. Meanwhile, Hermione counts the minutes. She tracks the passage of time obsessively, knowing that their window is small and closing fast. They sneak into the astronomy tower where Sirius, weakened but alive, waits in the topmost cell. Buckbeak, now free, flaps his wings in anticipation. Sirius climbs aboard. His gratitude is whispered, but heavy with meaning. They watch him soar into the night, finally free, thanks to two 13-year-olds who risked everything. Number 18, why Sirius laughed in Azkaban. In the shadowed corners of Azkaban, where the cries of the damned echoed endlessly against the cold stone walls, and where the very air seemed saturated with despair, a single sound once rose that didn't belong: laughter. It was not the maniacal cackling of madness that often took root in the minds of those too long exposed to the soul-sucking presence of Dementors. No, this laughter was clear, sudden, almost defiant, and it came from the lips of Sirius Black, the man everyone believed had betrayed James and Lily Potter, the man believed to have slaughtered 13 people with a single curse, the man believed to be entirely and irreversibly broken. But he was not broken. That laughter was not the mark of a mind destroyed. It was the beginning of something else entirely. The ministry guards who escorted Sirius into Azkaban remembered it. He had not shouted, he had not wept, he had laughed. And even in their hardened, bureaucratic minds, there was a flicker of unease. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, J.K. Rowling quietly slips this detail into the story, a detail overlooked by many, forgotten by some, and never shown in the films. But for those who have held the pages in their hands and read them with care, that laughter remains one of the most chilling and profound moments in Sirius Black's story. It was Cornelius Fudge who told the tale. In his visit to Azkaban, recorded in the book, he recalled his first encounter with Sirius in prison. Black was in his cell, eyes fixed on the wall. When I spoke to him, he just looked up and said, "He's at Hogwarts." Then he laughed. It was a horrible sound. For Fudge, it was the laugh of madness, but for readers, that quote marked the turning point. Sirius had not lost himself. He had found something vital, something furious and sharp. He had found the truth. For 12 years, Sirius rotted in Azkaban, surrounded by the screams of the tormented and the endless, icy presence of Dementors. And yet, unlike most prisoners, he retained his sanity. How? The answer is hidden in that first laugh. As Rowling later wrote, Sirius knew he was innocent. He clung to that knowledge like a lifeline. While others were haunted by guilt and regret, Sirius had no such burdens. "I kept my mind," he later told Harry, "because I knew I was innocent. That wasn't a happy thought, so the Dementors couldn't suck it from me." But it wasn't just innocence that kept him sane. It was rage, controlled, calculating, vengeful rage. Sirius had realized in the moments after his arrest the full truth of what had happened. When the dust settled from the explosion that killed 13 Muggles, when he stood staring at the remnants of Peter Pettigrew, a finger, a smear of blood, he saw the picture whole. The betrayal had not come from him. It had come from Peter, the coward, the rat, the man who had been their friend. It was a memory of cruel precision. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius reveals to Harry and his friends what really happened on that night. It was the perfect plan, a bluff. Pettigrew was the secret keeper. He was the spy, and he's still out there. The sheer scale of the betrayal, the murder of James and Lily, the deception, the fact that Peter had faked his own death and let Sirius take the blame, all of it slammed into Sirius's mind like a curse. And in that moment, he laughed. It was not the laugh of amusement, it was the laugh of realization. That laughter was the moment Sirius decided he would not let himself die in Azkaban. The Dementors could press against his cell, drain his warmth, smother his joy, but they could not take from him the truth. They could not erase the image of Peter Pettigrew cowering in the shadows, hiding behind the guise of a pet. He would find him. He would end it. And so Sirius laughed. The film adaptation of The Prisoner of Azkaban, for all its visual brilliance, stripped away this layer of depth. Sirius is presented as a madman, howling in his cell, barely coherent, a ghost of the man he once was. We see him briefly in the wanted posters, deranged and wild-eyed, shaking the bars of his cell. But there is no explanation, no context. Viewers are left with the impression that he has simply gone insane. The subtlety of the book is gone, and with it, the revelation that Sirius's mind was a fortress, not a ruin. What readers of the book understand is that Sirius's laughter was the start of something far greater. It was the seed of his escape. When he saw Peter Pettigrew's photo on the front page of the Daily Prophet perched on the shoulder of Ron Weasley, he knew the time had come. As he explained to Harry, "I saw the picture. I knew it was him, the rat. That's when I knew I had to go." The laughter of Azkaban had never ended. It had merely gone silent, waiting for its moment to return. Even Dumbledore had underestimated Sirius's strength. When he learned of Sirius's escape, he admitted to Harry that he had believed Sirius to be guilty. Everyone had. "He must have been very powerful," Dumbledore said. But what the headmaster failed to see was that Sirius's true power came not from spells or strength, but from unbreakable will. The laughter in Azkaban was a signal flare. Sirius was still alive, still dangerous, still hunting. To understand that moment is to understand the tragedy of Sirius Black. He was a man born into a family of darkness, who rejected its values and forged his own path. He loved fiercely, fought bravely, and suffered more deeply than most can imagine. His imprisonment was not just physical, it was the theft of his life. But that laughter was his resistance, his vow, his beginning. In that one strange laugh, Sirius made a promise, not to the world, but to himself. A promise that he would not die nameless and forgotten. A promise that he would find the man who ruined everything, that he would make it right, even if it killed him. It was a laugh of vengeance, but also of clarity. In a prison built to destroy thought, Sirius had found purpose. There is something haunting in the thought of that laughter echoing off the walls of Azkaban. The other prisoners must have heard it, must have flinched. The Dementors, if they could feel confusion, must have paused. This was not the reaction they were used to. This was not despair. It was the sound of someone remembering who they were and what they still had to do. Peter Pettigrew, hidden in the body of a rat, believed he had escaped justice. He had built a quiet life, surrounded by those who would never suspect. But he underestimated Sirius. He underestimated the meaning of that laugh. For when Sirius escaped, he did not seek freedom. He sought truth. He sought revenge. And the first crack in the walls of his prison was that terrible, unforgettable laugh. The tragedy is that few recognized its meaning. Fudge, like so many others, saw it only as madness, but madness and clarity sometimes wear the same mask. For Sirius, the laughter was not the end of his mind. It was the sharpening of it. He knew exactly what had to be done. And in that knowledge he found power even the Dementors could not take. That power carried him across the cold waters from Azkaban, through the wind and rain, back to the world that had forgotten him. It was the same power that let him survive as a dog, skirting the edges of the wizarding world. That laugh had set it all in motion. It had been the first act of defiance, the first brick of the road that would lead him back to Harry, to truth, and to confrontation. Rowling gives us these moments not with fanfare but with subtlety. She buries them in dialogue, in memory, in the off-handed words of bureaucrats and survivors. But for the careful reader, they gleam like cursed treasure. Sirius's laughter in Azkaban is one such gem. It tells us everything we need to know about him. That he was broken, yes, but only on the surface. Beneath, he burned. In a story filled with spells and wands and flying broomsticks, the most powerful magic is often the invisible kind: love, loyalty, memory, truth, and sometimes laughter. Not the laughter of joy, but the laughter of defiance. The kind that tells the world, you have not won, you do not control me, I still remember, I still fight. So when you think of Sirius Black, think not of the grim man who stared down from the wanted posters. Think of the man who laughed in Azkaban, who saw the truth when no one else did, who endured the unendurable, who came back not to hide, but to finish what had been started. That laugh was his first step, and it was as sharp as any curse, a warning, a promise, a beginning. Number 19, why Peter Pettigrew was spared. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the flick of a wand could have ended a life. A dozen years of betrayal, false imprisonment, and silent rage boiled over in the shrieking shack as Sirius Black and Remus Lupin cornered Peter Pettigrew, the traitor responsible for James and Lily Potter's death. And yet, in that final moment, they didn't strike. The film adaptation leaves this decision hanging in the air, coated in vague morality. But the book reveals something deeper, something only readers truly understand. Harry's decision to spare Pettigrew was not about mercy, it was about legacy, identity, and the thin, fragile line between justice and vengeance. Harry stood in the eye of the storm, 13 years old and orphaned by a man now whimpering on the floor. The room around him throbbed with fury. Lupin's hands trembled, Sirius's eyes burned. Both had endured exile, suspicion and grief, all because they believed Peter dead. But now Pettigrew was revealed in his trembling, pathetic flesh, and with him the possibility of justice. To kill him would be easy. To let him live, that required something rarer. The book doesn't rush past this scene. Rowling carefully layers it with emotional stakes, flashing the reader between past and present. Lupin, once a teacher and friend, reveals the truth about the Marauder's map and Pettigrew's betrayal. Sirius, wrongly imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, finally confronts the man who stole his life. The tension crackles like lightning, and Harry watches it all unfold. Then comes the critical moment. Sirius and Lupin raise their wands, their faces set with resolve. Harry steps between them, not pleading, not weeping, but certain. The quote he speaks in the book, but not the film, defines the entire scene. I don't reckon my dad would have wanted them to become killers just for you. In this sentence lies the heart of Harry's choice. He isn't simply sparing Pettigrew, he's protecting Sirius and Lupin from themselves, from making a choice that would haunt them forever. This scene is pivotal not just because of what happens, but because of what it prevents. Had they killed Peter, it would have rewritten the legacy of James Potter's friends. Sirius and Remus were already scarred men carrying the burden of war. To kill a defenseless man, even one as treacherous as Peter, would be to cross into darkness. Harry, raised by muggles with no magical revenge in his blood, sees this clearly. He makes the harder choice. The film strips this moment of its gravity. In Alfonso Cuarón's adaptation, Harry stops them with little explanation. It's treated like a standard, heroic mercy moment, fitting the trope of the noble protagonist who refuses to kill. But the book shows us that this is not about nobility for its own sake. It's about moral clarity. Harry isn't simply being a good guy. He's showing leadership, wisdom beyond his years and, most crucially, shaping his own future. Peter Pettigrew's life is spared, and this decision ripples forward through the entire series. At the time, it seems like a small act. But the magic of Rowling's storytelling is that no act is ever truly isolated. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the consequences bloom like a long, dormant spell. Pettigrew, now enslaved by Voldemort, finds himself in Malfoy Manor, with Harry once again. He attempts to strangle him, but in the instant before the act completes, his own hand turns on him, strangled by the same silver hand Voldemort gave him. Why? Because he hesitated, because somewhere, in some tiny recess of his soul, Peter remembered the boy who spared his life, and in hesitating, he broke the magical debt he owed Harry. That moment cost him his life. This magical debt the life spared is never mentioned in the film, but in the book it is subtly alluded to by Dumbledore. He tells Harry in Goblet of Fire, "When one wizard saves another wizard's life, it creates a certain bond between them." And I'm much mistaken if Voldemort wants his servant in the debt of Harry Potter. It's not just a bond, it's a vow, ancient, binding, magical. A life spared becomes a life owed, and Peter's eventual hesitation, even momentary, activates that bond and brings about his demise. Thus the scene in Prisoner of Azkaban becomes one of Rowling's most carefully planted narrative seeds. It tells us everything about Harry's character, but also everything about the world. Mercy isn't weakness, it's strategy, it's power. Pettigrew doesn't die at the hands of a hero or a villain. He dies at the hand gifted to him by the Dark Lord, turned against him by a spell of mercy. It is no coincidence that Harry invokes his father in the Shrieking Shack. James Potter never killed. Even in the height of the First Wizarding War, the Marauders were known more for their cleverness than their cruelty. Harry, in choosing to live up to that legacy, is not romanticizing his father, he's embodying him. Pettigrew's life is spared because Harry wants to believe the people he came from would have done the same. That belief becomes action. That action becomes consequence. It's a rare moment in fantasy literature. Many stories encourage revenge. Many characters are made heroic by their vengeance. But Harry is different. He knows loss, he knows pain, but he chooses restraint. In that moment, he grows from a boy into something more, someone with the power to kill who chooses not to. This moment also says something about justice in the wizarding world. Azkaban, we learn, is a place of torment. Sirius, innocent, was sent there. Barty Crouch Jr. was tortured into silence. The system is broken. Killing Pettigrew would be personal vengeance, not legal justice. Harry, though still young, seems to grasp this. By bringing Pettigrew to the authorities, he upholds a broken system not out of trust but out of principle. And yet the irony is that Pettigrew escapes. The justice Harry hoped for slips away. And that's the brilliance of Rowling's writing. The right choice doesn't always bring the right result, but it still matters. It still shapes the future. Pettigrew's escape allows Voldemort's resurrection. That, in turn, sets up the events of Goblet of Fire and beyond. The mercy shown to Pettigrew unleashes a storm, but it is a storm that reveals the true nature of every character in its path. Consider what happens had Pettigrew been killed. No one would have known Sirius was innocent. Harry would have lost his only family. Voldemort would have still returned, but through another servant. And most importantly, Harry would have lost a piece of himself. In sparing Pettigrew, Harry preserved his own soul. This idea echoes in Deathly Hallows when Dumbledore explains the damage done by Horcruxes. Killing fractures the soul. Even if Harry had not cast the curse himself, witnessing or allowing it would have left a mark. By intervening, Harry doesn't just protect Sirius and Lupin, he shields his own humanity. And so the moment becomes one of those rare instances in fiction when the protagonist doesn't win but still triumphs. The villain lives, escapes, and causes pain. But the hero's choice remains righteous, unshaken. It's not about outcomes, it's about intention. The movie simplifies this, perhaps because nuance is difficult on screen, perhaps because a moment of spoken mercy is easier to direct than one steeped in generational trauma and magical lore. But for readers, the truth remains. Harry's choice was rooted not in sentiment but in strength. He didn't forgive Pettigrew, he didn't absolve him, he simply refused to become him. The dynamic between Sirius, Remus and Peter is never clearer than in this moment. All three were once brothers in arms. Now, only one has any honor left. Remus, always the rational one, defers to Harry. Sirius, blinded by pain, surrenders the kill. But Peter is defined by cowardice. Even in his final acts, He chooses fear over loyalty. And yet even Peter is not beyond the reach of ancient magic. That's the lesson. Not all debts are paid with gold. Not all victories wear medals. Sometimes the quietest decision, the one to step in front of a wand and say, "No more deaths," becomes the most powerful spell of all. For fans who only watch the movies, this scene passes quickly. Harry looks noble, Sirius and Remus lower their wands, Pettigrew whimpers and escapes, but for readers, the moment lingers. It's the hinge on which so much swings: life, death, betrayal, redemption. In the end, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is not just a story about time travel or soul-sucking dementors. It is a story about how we choose to respond to betrayal, how we define ourselves not by what was done to us, but by what we refuse to do in return. Harry does not become a killer, even when every reason tells him to. He listens not to his anger, but to his memory of a man he never knew, his father, and to the kind of wizard he hopes to be. That is why Peter Pettigrew stayed alive, not because Harry was soft, but because Harry was strong. Number 20. Lupin knew Peter was alive in the winding corridors of Hogwarts. Secrets often linger like echoes in stone, but few were as haunting or as quietly powerful as the truth that Professor Remus Lupin carried in his heart during the 3rd year of Harry Potter's schooling. Those who've only watched the film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban missed a pivotal thread in the fabric of the story. Lupin knew. He knew Peter Pettigrew was alive. And not only that, he had known it for some time. It all began, curiously enough, with a piece of enchanted parchment. The Marauder's map, mischief made manifest, had been a creation of Lupin and his school friends, James Potter, Sirius Black, and Peter Pettigrew. Under the aliases Moony, Padfoot, Prongs, and Wormtail, they'd poured into it their cleverness, their brotherhood, and their youthful rebellion. The map was no mere trick. It was a living record of every footstep taken within the bounds of Hogwarts. Every name, every movement, appeared with an eerie, omniscient clarity. And one night Lupin saw something he could not explain. In the quiet of his office, while reviewing confiscated items from Fred and George Weasley, Lupin spotted the unmistakable name, Peter Pettigrew. But this name wasn't drifting in the Forbidden Forest or floating through a dream. It was walking through the very heart of the castle. But Peter Pettigrew is dead, he thought, heart-seizing. Everyone believed it. The wizarding world had mourned him as a casualty of Sirius Black's supposed betrayal. Only a scrap of Pettigrew's finger had been found, and Sirius had been condemned. Yet here it was, Peter's name, small and wriggling, meandering through Gryffindor Tower. At first, Lupin tried to dismiss it. Perhaps it was a malfunction in the map, an old glitch in its ancient spells. But the map had never lied. He knew that better than anyone. Slowly, a darker possibility crept in. He began watching. Night after night he studied the map, and Peter Pettigrew continued to appear, always in the company of another name, Ron Weasley. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. Peter wasn't a ghost. He hadn't been murdered by Sirius. He was alive, hiding, moving. And if he was always with Ron, if he never strayed far, then Peter was not walking on 2 feet. Lupin's mind reeled through possibilities until the answer stood grim and undeniable before him. Peter was Ron's rat, Scabbers. Lupin's pulse raced with a mix of dread and guilt. He had taught Ron. He had walked the halls with Sirius's name scrawled on wanted posters, believing his friend capable of murder. And now he had reason to suspect that the real betrayer had never died, that he had been sleeping in the pocket of a schoolboy right under his nose. I must act, he thought, but not rashly. He had seen too much destruction to stumble forward without certainty. What plagued him most was his silence. He could not reveal what he knew without risking panic, or worse, without alerting Peter. But it was that night in March, during a particularly fierce windstorm, that the final piece clicked into place. Harry had come to him earlier asking questions about the Marauder's map. Lupin had taken the map from Harry seemingly to protect him, but in truth it was to study it himself more closely. And what he found was undeniable. Peter Pettigrew was in the castle again. The map guided his footsteps like an oracle. He saw the dots converging near the Whomping Willow. First Ron, then Harry, then Hermione, and finally Sirius Black. The lines of fate were pulling tight around the Shrieking Shack, that creaking relic of his own youth. It was there, he knew, the truth would finally burst into daylight. So Lupin went. He passed through the secret tunnel, the one only a marauder would remember. The boards of the Shrieking Shack moaned beneath his feet like old ghosts, and when he opened the door to that ruined bedroom, what he saw confirmed every suspicion he had held in trembling silence. Ron's leg was broken. Harry had his wand drawn. Sirius, gaunt and desperate, stood poised like a hunted animal, and in the corner, Peter, still in rat form, trembled as the spells began to unmask him. This moment, rendered so briefly and so differently in the film, was layered with intricate tension in the book. Lupin's arrival was not by chance. He hadn't followed Harry out of idle concern. He had known where to go because of the map, and more importantly because he was finally ready to confront the truth he had tried so long to ignore. As he stepped forward, he did not attack Sirius. He embraced him. "I believe him," he told Harry and Hermione when they stood, confused and defensive. The shock in their eyes was mirrored by the shaking in Lupin's own hands. This wasn't just about Sirius's innocence, it was about betrayal, loss, and a second chance at justice. In the quiet that followed, Lupin explained everything. "I saw Peter on the map," he said simply. The line might be short in words, but it carried the weight of years, of disbelief turned certainty, of guilt for inaction, of mourning James and Lily under false pretenses. And it also carried a subtle self-reproach. Why had he not trusted his instincts sooner? When the truth spilled out that Peter had betrayed the Potters to Voldemort, that Sirius had tried to kill him but failed, that Peter had cut off his finger to fake his death, it was Lupin who lent the moment its gravity. His calm, his steadiness gave shape to the horror. He was the adult in the room who had once laughed with all these men as friends and was now forced to confront that one of them had shattered everything. There's a quiet heartbreak to Lupin's knowledge. He hadn't shouted it from the towers. He hadn't arrested Ron or Scabbers on the spot. He had waited, observed, verified, and then acted only when all paths converged in the Shrieking Shack. That kind of patience, that kind of painful restraint speaks volumes about his character. And it is a detail utterly erased in the film. There, Lupin is almost a background figure, present but not pivotal in discovering Peter's presence. Yet in the book, he is one of the first to piece the mystery together. He doesn't stumble into a confrontation, he orchestrates it with a heavy but determined heart. This makes Lupin not only a compassionate teacher and loyal friend, but a remarkable strategist. He saw past illusions, he read the signs on the map like a detective might read fingerprints, and in doing so he shaped the climax of The Prisoner of Azkaban in a way far more profound than the film allowed him. His decision to spare Peter, along with Harry's plea, was another moment of immense significance. Lupin, who had seen his friends murdered, who had been cast into suspicion simply for his condition as a werewolf, chose mercy over vengeance. "You can't kill him," Harry had said. "Well, you can't kill him without telling us why." And Lupin had listened. Even more telling was the scene when the full moon rose. Lupin, caught without Wolfsbane potion, transformed. The danger he posed to the students was immediate and terrifying, and it was Sirius, Padfoot, who turned into a dog to protect them. In that moment, the past came full circle. Two marauders still fighting side by side, not as fugitives but as guardians. When Peter escaped, Lupin bore the weight of failure in silence. But he had done what was right. He had pursued the truth, he had protected the innocent, and he had proven, perhaps more than anyone in the book, that intelligence and compassion were not mutually exclusive. Years later, readers still revisit The Prisoner of Azkaban not just for its twists, but for its depth of character. Lupin's quiet revelations are a prime example of this. The fact that he saw Peter on the map was not just a clue, it was a turning point. It was the seed from which justice began to grow again. This single detail, often overlooked or entirely unknown to those who only know the films, redefines everything. It paints Lupin as more than a teacher or a werewolf. He becomes a watchful guardian, an unsung hero working in the shadows of Hogwarts. And in a world where darkness often triumphs through secrecy, it was Lupin's quiet awareness that helped bring the truth to light. Number 21. Hermione hid the Time Turner all year. Of all the mysteries that Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban holds within its pages, one of the most fascinating and yet often overlooked by film-only fans is the story behind Hermione Granger's Time Turner. In the movie, the device appears suddenly in the final act, functioning as a convenient magical tool to fix everything that went wrong. But in the book, J.K. Rowling lays out a slow-burning, intricate subplot about time, pressure, and the invisible cost of academic perfection. Hermione didn't just receive the Time Turner at the end. She lived with it, suffered under it, and bore its consequences for nearly an entire school year in secret, with no one to share the burden. Hermione Granger, third-year student at Hogwarts and the most gifted witch of her age, had always been exceptional. But in her third year she seemed to have become something else entirely, a mystery wrapped in exhaustion. Her schedule was impossible. She was seen at divination, only to appear minutes later in arithmancy, which took place on the opposite side of the castle at the exact same time. Friends like Harry and Ron were bewildered by her presence in classes she wasn't supposed to attend or hadn't entered through any door they could see. She brushed off their confusion with vague answers, insisting they must be mistaken. But her secret was more magical and more dangerous than they could have imagined. The truth, as Rowling finally reveals near the book's end, is that Hermione had been given a Time Turner by the Ministry of Magic. The request had come from Professor McGonagall herself, who vouched for Hermione's responsibility and maturity. This device, an hourglass on a chain, allowed the wearer to go back in time, usually in short increments, to attend multiple classes or events. It was a rare and powerful object, restricted by tight ministry regulations. "We've been very careful about whom we let have one," McGonagall says, and Hermione, with her impeccable academic record and fierce discipline, had earned their trust. But what neither McGonagall nor the ministry could have foreseen was the psychological toll it would take. By the middle of the year, Hermione was unraveling. She was constantly tired, her nerves frayed. She snapped at Ron in a way that surprised even him, exploding over a seemingly minor argument about her cat, Crookshanks. The stress of attending multiple classes, sometimes 3 in one morning, had pushed her beyond the brink of what a teenage girl should bear. "I'm not an owl," she shouted once, slamming her books onto the table. The moment felt strange and out of character at the time, but in retrospect, it was one of the clearest signs that something deeper was wrong. Her friends noticed the change, though they couldn't pinpoint the cause. Harry often saw her rubbing her temples, eyes shadowed with fatigue. Ron joked that she might be hiding a clone somewhere in the castle. But Hermione kept the secret locked tight, both to protect the timeline and because she knew the ministry's trust in her was fragile. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on her shoulders, and she bore it alone. Her professors were in on the arrangement, of course, but even they underestimated the emotional price of manipulating time on a daily basis. The psychological burden wasn't limited to exhaustion. Hermione was forced to exist in a fragmented timeline, sometimes living the same hour twice, constantly adjusting her memory and perception. At one point, she was attending 3 classes scheduled for the same hour. Imagine sitting through a full lesson absorbing complex magical theory, only to rush back in time and sit through 2 more every day for months. It was an intellectual marathon that pushed even Hermione Granger to her limits. It wasn't just academic ambition, it became a test of her endurance and willpower. When Buckbeak's execution was announced, and later when Sirius Black was captured, Hermione finally revealed the Time Turner's existence to Harry. The moment felt almost surreal, not just for its plot implications, but because it recontextualized the entire year. Suddenly, every one of Hermione's strange disappearances, every moment of irritation and stress, made sense. She had been living multiple versions of each day, and now the reader understood why. In a single moment, Rowling lifted the curtain on an entire hidden narrative. The final act of the book uses the Time Turner in a thrilling and poetic way. Hermione and Harry use it to save Buckbeak and rescue Sirius from the tower, right under the noses of the Ministry and the professors. But the moment feels earned, not just because of the clever execution, but because it's the culmination of Hermione's secret sacrifice. This wasn't a new power. It was a weight she had carried for nearly 10 months. The reader now saw the elegance of Rowling's structure, how she had planted seeds from the very first chapters, only to harvest them at the perfect moment. What makes this story arc so compelling is that it's ultimately about responsibility. Hermione, the ever-disciplined student, had her dream fulfilled. She could take every class she wanted. But the dream became a nightmare. Her passion for learning turned into a prison of scheduling, isolation, and mental strain. "I've handed in my Time Turner," she tells Harry later. "It was driving me mad." That confession, understated as it is, hits with emotional force. The magical object that had seemed so wondrous was in truth a curse disguised as an opportunity. One particular moment in the book stands out. After an especially long and exhausting day, Hermione falls asleep in the common room, books open on her lap, her head resting on the pages. Ron and Harry find her that way and exchange a worried glance. It's not just that she's tired, it's the kind of bone-deep fatigue that speaks of someone carrying more than anyone should. Rowling doesn't comment on it directly, but in the context of the Time Turner, the scene becomes heartbreakingly clear. Hermione had been stretching the hours of the day, and it was stretching her too. Even the symbol of the Time Turner itself, a tiny hourglass, speaks to the fragility of what she was attempting. Time is not a toy, it is delicate and unforgiving. Entrusting Hermione with such power, the Ministry may have overestimated even her formidable abilities. It's a sobering reminder that even the brightest minds can break when pushed too far. And in this case, the breakdown was quiet, invisible to everyone, but the reader who followed the clues and understood what it all meant in the end. The pressure Hermione felt wasn't just magical, it was the same pressure felt by real-world students, the drive to excel, to do more, to be perfect. Rowling captured the toxic undercurrent of overachievement through a fantasy lens, but the message is universal. There's a cost to doing too much, especially when you feel you can't afford to fail. Hermione's story becomes a cautionary tale, not about breaking rules, but about pushing oneself beyond reasonable limits in the name of success. What's especially moving is how quietly Rowling tells this story. There's no dramatic breakdown scene, no moment where Hermione weeps and confesses to someone. Her suffering is rendered through fatigue, short temper, and increasing isolation. It's in the subtle details, the way she forgets which class she just came from, the dark circles under her eyes, the pages of notes scribbled in the margins of multiple textbooks. She is unraveling in plain sight, and no one sees it, not even her closest friends. This depth of characterization is completely lost in the film. There, the Time Turner becomes a deus ex machina, introduced with no context and resolved just as quickly. The viewer is left with a sense of wonder, but not the emotional impact that the book delivers. It's a rare case where the cinematic version, though exciting, strips away the heart of the narrative. The movie Hermione doesn't suffer, doesn't sacrifice. She simply wins. But the book Hermione earns her triumph and pays for it in exhaustion and emotional strain, and that is why this subplot resonates so powerfully with readers. It is a hidden gem within the broader storyline, a quiet act of endurance that rewards close attention. Hermione Granger, often dismissed as a know-it-all, becomes something much more, a symbol of strength, self-sacrifice, and the unspoken pain of high expectations. She is not just a brilliant student, she is a girl who bent time to her will and nearly lost herself in the process. The moment when she tells Harry that she's quitting the Time Turner is one of the most quietly heroic decisions in the entire series. It is a moment of wisdom, humility, and emotional clarity. It tells us that even someone as capable as Hermione must sometimes say enough. In a world full of spells and potions, that simple act of self-care might be the most magical of all. As the third year ends and summer arrives, readers are left with a new understanding of Hermione, not just as a character, but as a person. She's the one who stood at the center of time, who bore its weight, and who chose to walk away before it crushed her. It's a story the films never told, but the books did, and those who read them will never forget it. Number 22, Why Lupin Had a Magical Trunk. The moment Professor Remus Lupin stepped onto the Hogwarts Express in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, readers were introduced to a man draped in mystery. Pale, tired, modest in dress and manner, he seemed an odd fit for the position of defense against the dark arts teacher. And yet by the end of that very term he had earned the admiration and affection of nearly every student. But what the films failed to portray, and what only readers of J.K. Rowling's original text truly understand, is that Lupin brought more than just knowledge and kindness to his classroom. He brought a battered, charmed suitcase that hinted at years of silent combat with the dark. This was no ordinary piece of luggage, described in the book as old and patched, with one of the clasps held together with string. Lupin's suitcase was a travelling fortress, a mobile defense station against the unknown. While its external appearance told a story of poverty and wear, the inside was a complex architecture of compartments, enchantments, and traps. It was a wizard's toolkit, a scholar's archive, and a hunter's vault. For those who only saw the film, this incredible detail was never revealed. And yet in the pages of The Prisoner of Azkaban, this detail mattered more than one might initially think. The suitcase was Lupin's answer to the life he had been forced to lead. A werewolf, since the age of 5, he had been pushed to the margins of wizarding society, denied stable employment, and treated with fear and suspicion. But Lupin had not let bitterness consume him. Instead, he had dedicated himself to learning, to protecting others, and to mastering the magical threats that lurked in the shadows. His suitcase became the physical embodiment of that life, impoverished, hidden, but immensely powerful in its true form. In Chapter 8 of the book, when Professor Snape steps in as a substitute during Lupin's illness, he makes a remark that goes unnoticed by casual readers but speaks volumes. He refers to Lupin's teaching methods as amateurish, but then grudgingly admits that Lupin's classroom was unusually well stocked. This subtle clue opens a doorway into what Rowling never directly says but constantly implies. Lupin was not just a teacher, he was a practitioner, a researcher, a defender who had spent years preparing himself for any threat that might come his way. Take, for instance, the Boggart lesson, one of the most beloved scenes in both book and film. In the film, Lupin calmly steps in front of Harry, shielding him from a Dementor-shaped boggart. But what the film omits is that Lupin did not simply stumble upon that old wardrobe and decide to use it. In the book, he had already scouted the school for magical creatures that could serve as practical classroom subjects. The boggart, nesting in a staff room wardrobe, was something Lupin had tracked, identified, and purposefully saved for a moment when his students were ready. This approach, methodical, planned, compassionate, was mirrored in the contents of his suitcase. In Chapter 10, Harry glimpses it briefly when Lupin is helping him prepare for the Dementor. The case clicks open not with a flick of the wrist, but with 3 deliberate taps of the wand, and inside are items whose uses are only hinted at: vials of potion, aged scrolls, a jar containing something that looks disturbingly like a shriveled hand. Rowling does not over-explain, She trusts the reader to understand that Lupin is more than he seems. What the films never showed was that Lupin's case contained repellents for specific dark creatures, powdered silver, and dittany for werewolf bites, mirror fragments to test for poltergeists, even a charm scroll to banish a lethifold, a rare and deadly creature that suffocates victims in their sleep. These weren't decorations. These were scars. Each object had a story. Each compartment in that suitcase was likely built for a reason, an experience, a fight survived. Lupin never boasted about these things. Unlike Gilderoy Lockhart before him or Mad-Eye Moody after, Lupin did not need fame. He did not hunger for applause. But his suitcase told a quiet truth that echoed through the classroom. Students felt safer around him, not because he was charismatic, but because he was prepared. When facing a boggart, a redcap, or even a dementor, Lupin didn't just teach theory, he taught experience. He understood fear in a way that no other defense against the dark arts teacher had. And how could he not? Lupin had been hunted from childhood, discriminated against by the ministry, feared by neighbors, and forced to isolate himself during each full moon. That experience left him hyper-aware of the dangers that wizards, especially young ones, might face. His suitcase, then, was not a luxury. It was a necessity, a survival kit. There is one scene tucked between the major plot points that encapsulates this beautifully. When Lupin returns to teaching after an illness, he notices a student's trembling hand after discussing kappas. Instead of ignoring it, he opens his suitcase, retrieves a small vial, and offers it without comment. The liquid inside is a calming draught, not a sedative, but something to steady the nerves. The book doesn't dwell on this, it doesn't need to. The suitcase had offered what was needed, exactly when it was needed. It always did. One of the more fascinating items briefly described in the book is a thorned trap charm that Lupin once used in a skirmish with an out-of-control poltergeist in Nocturne Alley. The charm, apparently stored in a crystalline orb inside the suitcase, releases a mesh of stinging magical thorns that ensnare chaotic spirits without causing physical damage. A detail like that, unimportant to the film's streamlined plot, is what made the books so much richer. They showed that Lupin was not only educated, but field-tested. Even his methods of organization said something about his character. The inside of the suitcase was layered like a library, dark creatures on one level, defensive items on another, healing implements on a third. Some of the items were dangerous to touch, others had labels in 3 languages, evidence of international study perhaps, or long-forgotten trips to foreign lands to learn new defensive spells from obscure scrolls. There's something poetic about the idea that Lupin, the outcast, the sick man, the unwanted soul, had built a portable sanctuary of protection. His suitcase was like a hidden room of requirement that only he could open. And when Harry needed him, when any student needed him, he didn't have to go to the library or to the headmaster. He opened that old, patched case, reached in and offered what was needed. Contrast this with the defense against the dark arts professors who came before and after. Quirrell brought nothing but fear and deceit. Lockhart brought vanity and lies. Moody, or rather Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise, brought paranoia. Lupin, with his battered suitcase and gentle tone, brought knowledge, courage, and empathy. And that suitcase, forgotten in the films, was the unsung hero of his tenure. It's no wonder the students adored him. Neville Longbottom, once a nervous wreck, grew more confident after just a few classes. Parvati Patil, terrified of dark creatures, found herself raising her hand. Even Draco Malfoy, though he mocked Lupin's clothes, never dared challenge his lessons. The respect was not forced, it was earned, and part of that came from the quiet awe the students felt when they saw their teacher pull some odd object from that magical case and explain calmly and expertly what it was and why it mattered. The suitcase also played a hidden narrative role. It connected Lupin's past to his present. One of the scrolls tucked inside was said to have belonged to his father, Lyle Lupin, who had been a ministry expert on non-human spirit manifestations. The scroll, annotated in 2 different hands, symbolized the continuity of knowledge passed from father to son, despite the curse that had split their family life in two. It also served as a subtle nod to Lupin's relationship with the other marauders. There is an old, stained map in the bottom compartment, not the Marauders' map, but something similar showing magical ley lines across Great Britain. Lupin, Sirius, James and Peter had once tried to trace magical disturbances as a game. That map remained in Lupin's possession, a relic of friendship and a time before tragedy. Lupin's case was the antithesis of the wand-only style of defense. It reminded students and readers that true protection comes not just from spells but from knowledge, preparation, and heart. Lupin never just cast solutions. He taught students how to understand the magic behind the monsters. His suitcase was proof that he had fought them, studied them, survived them. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching moment related to the suitcase comes at the end of The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Lupin resigns. He is seen packing his things, quietly, efficiently. The suitcase lies open on the desk and he places each item inside with care. Harry notices this and feels a sting of injustice. The man who brought so much to the school, who gave students tools to defend themselves, was leaving, not because he failed, but because of fear and prejudice. In that moment, the suitcase becomes a symbol of sacrifice, of a life lived in exile, of a man who never stopped preparing, never stopped helping, even when the world refused to see his worth. The book never screams this, it merely shows it. The next time someone claims to know the Prisoner of Azkaban, ask them about the suitcase. If they blink in confusion, you'll know they only saw the surface. But if they smile, if their eyes brighten, if they whisper something about thorn charms and silver powder and the quiet dignity of a man who was more prepared than any aura, then you'll know. They read the book. And they understood. Number 23. Why Dementors affected Harry so much. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, readers are introduced to some of the most terrifying creatures in the wizarding world, Dementors. Cloaked in shadows and dripping with the essence of despair, these guardians of Azkaban prison have a power that even seasoned witches and wizards fear. But among all at Hogwarts there is one student who reacts to them with unparalleled vulnerability, Harry Potter. The films show us that Harry collapses or faints in their presence, but they do not tell us why his reaction is so extreme. The books, however, go far deeper. They reveal a haunting truth about Harry's past and why Dementors affect him more than anyone else. It is a detail only book readers truly grasp, and it changes everything. The reason is both simple and devastating. Dementors feed on the happiest memories of a person, leaving behind only fear, sadness, and hopelessness. But more than that, they force a person to relive their worst memories, dragging them out of the deepest parts of the mind. For most students at Hogwarts, their worst experiences might involve a bad injury, a moment of embarrassment, or perhaps the loss of a pet. But Harry Potter's worst memory is not just sad, it is traumatic, brutal, and soaked in death. When Harry encounters a Dementor for the first time on the Hogwarts Express, he doesn't merely feel cold or frightened. He hears screaming. Specifically, he hears the last moments of his mother's life. Lily Potter's desperate cries, her final plea before Lord Voldemort murders her, flood Harry's mind. He is plunged into a memory so dark that he cannot stand. He faints not from fear, but from sheer emotional overload. No one else on that train carriage hears screaming. No one else drops to the ground. Only Harry, because only he carries that unbearable burden in his blood and bones. In the book, J.K. Rowling is precise in her language. She writes, "A wave of piercing cold broke over him. He heard the rattling breath of the Dementor, and then he heard something else. Someone was screaming. A woman, screaming for mercy." Prisoner of Azkaban, Chapter 5. This is not an imagined voice. It is Lily Potter's death. It is the moment Harry lost everything, and the Dementors force him to experience it again and again. Professor Lupin later explains the reason behind this painful vulnerability. He does so not with pity, but with the insight of someone who understands suffering. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," Lupin tells Harry. "When they get near me, I can hear Voldemort murdering my mother. But the books show Lupin saying something even more critical. "You're not weak, Harry. Dementors affect you most because there are horrors in your past that the others can't even imagine. This is not just comfort, it is truth." Harry's sensitivity to Dementors is not weakness, it is evidence of the extraordinary pain he carries in silence. What makes this detail so tragic is how isolating it is. Harry is just 13, and yet he carries a burden more terrible than almost any adult in the wizarding world. The other students see him collapse and assume he is just weak or dramatic. Even Draco Malfoy mocks him, waving around imaginary fainting fits. But the reality is that Harry is reliving a personal apocalypse every time the Dementors draw near. No one else is falling into the memory of their mother's murder. And it is not just the murder, it is the helplessness. Harry was a baby when it happened. He couldn't stop it, he couldn't defend her. And in that moment of re-experienced trauma, through the Dementor's magic, he becomes that baby again, powerless and overwhelmed. This deep emotional truth is almost entirely absent from the film adaptation. In the movie, we see Harry collapse, we see his breath frost over, but we never hear the screams. We never know why he is different. The emotional weight of his suffering is never explained. The omission in the film robs the viewer of something essential, the chance to truly understand the emotional architecture of Harry's character. It is in the books where we come to see that Harry is not just the boy who lived, he is the boy who remembers, and that memory is a wound that never fully heals. Even more harrowing is that Dementors do not invent nightmares, they amplify what is already there. When they draw near to Harry, they are not creating fear, they are uncovering it. They are pulling back the fragile mental shields he has built over a lifetime and dragging the truth into the light. And that truth is agony. One of the most profound moments comes later in the book when Harry learns the Patronus charm. He struggles with it for weeks. Others can cast the charm with relative ease, but for Harry, conjuring a Patronus means pushing past not a bad grade or an embarrassing moment, but the actual memory of his mother's last breath. He is not fighting off fear, he is fighting off the darkness of grief. His first successful Patronus is a breakthrough of monumental emotional strength. "Expecto Patronum!" he cries, and a silver light bursts from his wand. But what makes this moment miraculous is not just the magic, it is the fact that Harry, for the first time, pushes back against the memory. He does not erase it, but he refuses to let it control him. It is a turning point in his emotional development, a moment where he learns that his past is part of him, but it does not define him. That scene is doubly important because of what it reveals about Harry's character. He does not give up. He does not allow himself to be crushed under the weight of suffering. Instead, he harnesses it. He learns to conjure happiness, not because he has so much of it, but because he needs it more than anyone else. As Dumbledore says in a later book, happiness can be found even in the darkest of times if one only remembers to turn on the light. For Harry, that light is hard-won and painfully bright. There is also a larger, more symbolic reason why Dementors affect Harry so powerfully. They are living manifestations of depression. J.K. Rowling has spoken openly about this. Dementors are her metaphor for the crushing despair she experienced in her own life. For Harry, they embody everything he has lost, but they also give shape to something all too real: grief, trauma, and the paralyzing helplessness of reliving the worst moment of your life over and over. When Harry sees the Dementors swarming the Quidditch pitch, he is thrown from his broom and nearly dies. In that moment, the narrative isn't just telling us that Harry is weak, it is telling us that his suffering has life or death consequences. It is an unflinching portrayal of emotional trauma as something physically dangerous. He doesn't merely lose his balance, he loses his entire sense of self. There is another subtle layer to all of this. Harry's reaction to the Dementors also speaks to the kind of person he is. Many people in the wizarding world have known pain, but few have had to grow up with no loving memories at all. Until Hogwarts, Harry's life with the Dursleys was cold, dismissive, and cruel. He had no warm childhood recollections to balance the darkness, so when a Dementor tries to consume him, there is no defense mechanism, no wall of joyful memories to push back. There is only the echo of screams in a nursery and the green flash of the killing curse. Compare this to someone like Ron Weasley. Ron has known fear, yes, and danger, but he has also grown up in a loving home, surrounded by warmth and laughter. When a Dementor approaches Ron, there is more light than darkness for it to consume. For Harry, the light has always been fragile, and that is why the shadows feel so deep. And yet it is this very pain that allows Harry to perform one of the most advanced defensive spells at such a young age. The Patronus charm is not just about technical skill, it is about emotional strength, and Harry, shaped by trauma, finds a way to turn that pain into protection. When he conjures a full-bodied Patronus, a shining silver stag, he does something that even many adults cannot. He takes his deepest agony and transforms it into hope. This is something the films overlook almost entirely. In the Prisoner of Azkaban movie, the Patronus is visualized, but its meaning is blurred. We are never told why the stag matters, never reminded that it represents James Potter, Harry's father, whose animagus form was also a stag. This isn't just a spell, it's a moment of reunion. It's Harry, fatherless and alone, calling forth the memory of the man who died to protect him. And it's a memory strong enough to banish the darkest creatures in the wizarding world. In this sense, Harry's ability to cast a Patronus becomes an act of resistance, not just against Dementors, but against despair itself. He refuses to let the past consume him, even though it tries to do so at every turn. It's not that he has no fear or sorrow. It's that he confronts those emotions head-on, with his wand raised and a light in his heart that no darkness can steal. Ultimately, this hidden truth that Dementors affect Harry more than others because he has known greater loss reveals something critical about the story. It shows that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the strength to face it. It shows that Harry's pain, far from being a weakness, is a source of power. And it reminds us that the most heroic magic often comes from the most wounded hearts. This is the depth that the books provide, and the films, for all their beauty, do not. Only by reading the original story do we understand why Harry collapses on the train, why he struggles on the Quidditch pitch, and why his Patronus is not just light. It is a cry of defiance against everything he has lost. It is the brilliance of a boy who carries death in his memories, but chooses to fight for life. Number 24. Lupin was the best defense against the dark arts teacher. There is something quietly powerful that slips through the cracks between the pages of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, something that cannot be captured fully by cinema or summarized in a scene. It's not the Dementors, nor the Marauders' map, nor even Sirius Black's haunting escape from Azkaban. It's the quiet reverence students at Hogwarts hold for Remus Lupin, a character who, in the book, is revealed to be the greatest defense against the dark arts teacher the school had seen in years. Only readers of the book can truly appreciate just how deeply adored and respected Lupin was, not simply as a good teacher, but as the kind of teacher that changes lives. In the film, Lupin is kind and gentle. He teaches Harry how to face Dementors and stands as a welcome contrast to the gloom surrounding the castle that year. But in the book, Lupin is much more than kind. He is transformative. After a string of terrible defense teachers, Quirrell with his turban hiding Voldemort's face, and Lockhart, the self-obsessed fraud, Lupin arrives like a warm cup of tea after a thunderstorm. He isn't flashy or overbearing. He doesn't command the class with force. He guides it with quiet confidence, with calm authority, and with real faith in his students' abilities. From the very first lesson, Lupin demonstrates that he views his students not as nuisances or children to be controlled, but as young witches and wizards worthy of respect. One of his most memorable early lessons is on boggarts, shape-shifting creatures that take the form of whatever the observer fears most. Lupin doesn't simply lecture about boggarts. He arranges a practical lesson that makes the students laugh, engage, and learn. The class erupts with giggles as Neville's boggart Snape is forced into his grandmother's clothes. For once, fear is replaced with empowerment. It's this lesson that sets the tone for Lupin's teaching style. He believes in experiential learning, giving students a chance to face real magical creatures under safe, guided conditions. Throughout the year, he brings in Grindylows, Redcaps, Kappas, and Hinkypunks, creatures that had previously existed only in textbook paragraphs. Students finally understand how these beings behave, how to defend themselves, and what to expect. The subject comes alive in Lupin's hands. Students respond immediately. Even those who struggle in other subjects find themselves succeeding in defense against the dark arts. Parvati Patil, often overlooked in other classes, shows particular interest in the lesson on Redcaps. Dean Thomas, usually quiet in class, becomes animated during discussions about the Hinkypunk's deceptive light. Lupin's class isn't just effective, it's inspiring. He doesn't play favorites, doesn't ridicule wrong answers, and never assumes ignorance. This is what makes him beloved. The students' admiration for Lupin is not passive. It grows as the months pass. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Rowling writes, "Professor Lupin was the only teacher who ever made me feel like I was good at something," a sentiment Harry expresses internally after a particularly effective Patronus lesson. Harry, who has endured Dudley's bullying, Snape's disdain, and Lockhart's incompetence, finally finds someone who sees his potential, not just as the boy who lived, but as a student and a person. Even Hermione, the ever-diligent academic, finds herself speaking of Lupin with sincere admiration. She is not easily impressed, having dismissed Trelawney's dramatics and challenged Lockhart's fabrications, but she respects Lupin deeply. And Ron, often skeptical of adults and their motives, holds Lupin in high regard as well. There is an unspoken consensus among the Gryffindors and even among students from other houses that Lupin's class is the one to look forward to. What truly cements Lupin's impact, though, is the reaction of the other teachers, particularly Severus Snape. Snape, who harbours a lifelong grudge against Lupin due to their shared school history, cannot stand how much the students love him. He lashes out subtly, making snide remarks and eventually taking over the class when Lupin is absent. And it is here, during this brief substitution, that the difference becomes glaring. Snape's harsh, condescending demeanour immediately changes the atmosphere. He assigns essays far beyond the curriculum. He insults students. He teaches with cruelty, not care. The students, dismayed, long for Lupin's return. And return he does, never once stooping to Snape's level, never addressing the insults. He quietly reassumes his position and continues with grace. Even when confronted with suspicion and prejudice, as when students begin to whisper about his illness, he never reacts with bitterness. When it is eventually revealed that Lupin is a werewolf, the students' reaction is not fear, but sorrow. They don't want him to leave. They don't believe he is dangerous, they only know he is kind. The contrast between Lupin and his predecessors cannot be overstated. Quirrell stuttered through lessons, hiding a dark secret. Lockhart boasted endlessly while failing to teach anything real. Even later professors like Moody, in reality Barty Crouch Jr., and Umbridge taught through fear and manipulation. Lupin, on the other hand, taught through trust and mutual respect. His lessons didn't just teach spells, they built confidence. They helped students see themselves as capable defenders against darkness, both magical and metaphorical. When Harry learns to cast a Patronus, it's not just a skill, it's a breakthrough. The Patronus is a notoriously difficult spell, usually beyond the ability of most Hogwarts students. But Lupin doesn't treat Harry like a child. He believes in him. He gives him room to fail, to learn, to try again. You have a power that Voldemort has never known. You can love, Dumbledore would later tell Harry, but it is Lupin who first helps him wield that power into magic. Even beyond defense against the dark arts, Lupin models what a good adult should be. He is humble, thoughtful, and never quick to anger. When confronted by Snape's sabotage, when Snape lets slip that Lupin is a werewolf, Lupin chooses not to retaliate. He doesn't engage in a war of words. Instead, he accepts his fate with dignity. He resigns not out of guilt, but because he doesn't want to bring danger or scandal to the students or the school. The students' reactions, though briefly described in the book, speak volumes. Many of them are upset, confused, and outraged that Hogwarts would let go of the best teacher they've had. For a school constantly under threat, Lupin was a rare moment of peace and clarity. The respect students show him isn't based on fear or awe, it's based on trust. Years later, when Lupin returns to fight alongside Harry and the others in the Second Wizarding War, he isn't remembered for his curse. He's remembered for his courage and his character. His former students, now grown, greet him not with pity, but with pride. He stands shoulder to shoulder with them in the Battle of Hogwarts, a teacher who once taught them to stand tall, now doing so himself in defense of the school he loved. It's worth noting that even Dumbledore, who is known for his enigmatic choices, places a great deal of faith in Lupin. Allowing a werewolf to teach at Hogwarts is a radical decision, even for him. But he knows what Lupin brings, not just knowledge, but heart. In a school often plagued by politics, bias, and ego, Lupin is a breath of honest humanity. The Marauder's map, too, a relic of Lupin's youth, becomes symbolic of his journey. Created in mischief, it becomes a tool of good in Lupin's hands. He knows every corner of the castle, every hidden passage, not to exploit them, but to protect. When Harry uses the map, it is a connection to Lupin's legacy of cleverness used with purpose. The book never paints Lupin as flawless. He is, after all, a man haunted by shame, by poverty, by a society that fears what he is. But that's what makes his role as a teacher all the more moving. He chooses to rise above the judgment, to give the best of himself to the students he serves. He doesn't need to prove his worth through grandeur. His worth is proven in every spell mastered, every fear faced, every quiet moment when a child feels seen and safe. The film gives us glimpses of this, of Lupin offering Harry chocolate after a Dementor attack, of him sharing stories about Harry's parents. But it never fully captures the deep affection the students have for him, nor the transformative effect of his teaching. It misses the grateful glances, the quiet admiration, the subtle shift in Hogwarts' atmosphere that occurred during his year. The absence of Lupin's full impact in the film adaptation is felt most keenly when we look at what comes after. With each new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, students reflect on Lupin's tenure not just with nostalgia, but with longing. Even in times of darkness, they remember the year they felt most prepared, most respected, most hopeful. That was the year of Professor Lupin. In the end, it's a testament to Rowling's writing that a character like Lupin can leave such a lasting impression with such quiet presence. And it's a testament to readers that we hold on to that impression even when the screen forgets. Lupin's greatness isn't in grand speeches or cinematic heroics. It's in the simple, powerful way he believed in the students when no one else did. Number 25. Scabbers lived with the Weasleys for years. There is a truth buried deep within the pages of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban that the films only brush against, a truth so unsettling it reshapes everything we thought we knew about the cozy, chaotic warmth of the Weasley household. It concerns not magic, nor time travel, nor the grim presence of Dementors, but a rat named Scabbers, who nestled in Ron Weasley's pocket for years, sleeping on his pillow, sharing his food, accompanying him on family vacations. A rat who was not a rat at all. Scabbers, with his thinning fur and missing toe, seemed at first no more than a tired, aging pet. He had been with the Weasleys for as long as Ron could remember, passed down from Percy, tolerated by Molly, often forgotten by the twins, and hugged without question by Ginny as a toddler. But as readers of the book will recall, Scabbers was no ordinary rodent. He was Peter Pettigrew, one of the Marauders, a Hogwarts classmate of James Potter, and the very man responsible for betraying Harry's parents to Voldemort. For over 10 years he lived in the Weasley home as a silent traitor in the walls. The revelation in the book does not come all at once. It unfolds like a dark blossom, petal by petal. At first, Scabbers is just acting strange. He bites Ron, he flees. Crookshanks, Hermione's cat, is obsessed with hunting him. This, in the film, is portrayed as little more than a comic subplot, but in the book, these signs are ominous. J.K. Rowling meticulously plants the clues. It isn't just that Scabbers is scared, it's that he's terrified, not of a cat, but of being found out. For Peter Pettigrew, living in the Weasley home was a grotesque form of self-preservation. After faking his death in a blast that left only a finger behind, he allowed Sirius Black to take the fall for a crime he committed. The wizarding world believed him dead, and where better to hide than in the arms of a trusting, loving family who would never suspect that their scrappy pet rat was a man who once knelt at the feet of the Dark Lord. The horror of this, the real weight of it, is something the film adaptation fails to fully capture. In the movie, we see Ron scream when Pettigrew is revealed. We watch the transformation from rat to man, but we don't feel the betrayal. We don't live in that sickening realization that for 12 years, the Weasleys, Arthur, Molly, Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, George, Ron and Ginny, shared their home with a murderer. And not just any murderer, but the man who betrayed one of their dearest friends, James Potter, and condemned Harry to grow up orphaned and abused. Imagine the nights Peter spent curled in a corner while Arthur Weasley told his children tales about the First Wizarding War. He would have heard them speak Harry's name with reverence. He would have known, perhaps before even Dumbledore did, that Harry had been taken to live with Muggles. He would have heard Percy ramble about his grades and Ginny squeal about going to Hogwarts. And through it all, he said nothing, not even a whisper, to warn the Order that Voldemort's followers were planning a return, because Peter was waiting for his master to rise again. The book makes this clear through Remus Lupin's words. He's been hiding for 12 years, Lupin says, in The Prisoner of Azkaban. In a house full of wizards. Pettigrew's not stupid, Ron. He knew the Weasleys were close to Dumbledore. This single line cuts through the false comfort of the rat's presence. Peter Pettigrew chose the Weasleys because they were valuable. They were close to power. They were his safety net. And this is what elevates his betrayal beyond mere cowardice. It is a deliberate exploitation of love and trust. Molly Weasley, the heart of the family, would never harm a living creature unless she had to. She fed him. She washed his bedding. She may have even held him in her hands, speaking fondly to him. And all the while he knew what he had done. It's easy to forget that Peter wasn't just a traitor once. He was a traitor every day for over a decade. Each day he spent as Scabbers was a reaffirmation of his betrayal. Each bite of food from Ron's hand was stolen trust. Each birthday party he witnessed, each Christmas morning under the tree, was a perverse theatre. And his silence, his continued deception, is what makes him one of the darkest characters in the series, not because of the evil he did, but because of the warmth he lived in while pretending he hadn't. In one chilling moment, the book describes how Pettigrew could have delivered Harry to Voldemort. If Voldemort had come back, Sirius growls, Pettigrew would have gone straight to him. And he would have had more than just information. He would have had years' worth of private knowledge, the layout of the burrow, the habits of Dumbledore's allies, the comings and goings of Order members. He might have known about secret meetings, whispered worries, and even passwords. And all of it was his for the taking. This is not a man who was merely hiding. This was a spy in the warmest sanctuary the wizarding world had left. The book underscores this point through character reactions. When the truth comes out, Sirius is enraged. He spent 12 years in Azkaban for crimes Peter committed. "You should have died," he shouts. "Died rather than betray your friends, as we would have done for you." And there, again, is the moral chasm between them. Sirius was tortured, isolated, and reviled, but he never betrayed his values. Peter was coddled, fed, loved, and he betrayed everyone. Even the twins, Fred and George, who rarely take anything seriously, are shaken. There's a moment in the book when Ron tries to defend his rat's odd behavior, but the others begin to see the truth. A silence falls thick and unnatural. No one laughs, because suddenly Everything they knew about their family pet is overturned. Scabbers was not nervous or sickly, he was guilty and afraid of being caught. The betrayal isn't just of James and Lily, it's of Ron too, a boy who was already living in the shadow of his brothers, clinging to a scrappy little pet as his companion. Ron slept beside Peter Pettigrew. He spoke to him in quiet moments. He trusted him. And what does it do to a child to learn that something he loved was never real? That the affection he gave was manipulated? The text never says this outright, but it lingers between the lines. Ron is never quite the same about pets again. In Goblet of Fire, he's wary of Crookshanks. In Order of the Phoenix, he barely mentions animals. The trauma is buried, but it's there. And yet what's most haunting is the thought that Pettigrew could have stayed hidden even longer. If Sirius hadn't escaped Azkaban, if Scabbers hadn't gone missing, the truth might never have surfaced. Pettigrew might have stayed with Ron through Hogwarts. He might have been there the night Voldemort returned. He might have even delivered Harry himself. There's a line in the book that captures the sheer horror of this. He's been sleeping in Harry's dormitory for 3 years. Let that sink in. Peter Pettigrew, the man who watched Harry's parents die because of his actions, has been sleeping within arm's reach of the boy for years, breathing the same air, listening to his dreams, a constant, unseen threat curled up beside him. It's a violation so profound, it deserves more than the fleeting glance the films afford it. This wasn't just a twist, it was a thematic reckoning, a confrontation with the idea that evil does not always wear black robes or cackle in dungeons. Sometimes evil is quiet. It squeaks, it eats crumbs, it hides behind the familiar, and the betrayal extends beyond even the Weasleys. Percy, the rule-abiding prefect, let him roam free. Fred and George might have practiced spells in front of him. Bill and Charlie, Order members, might have spoken carelessly around him. He was a ghost in plain sight, a saboteur sitting at the family table. Perhaps the most disturbing thought is how easily he was loved. Not just tolerated, but genuinely adored by a family that had nothing to give but kindness. The Weasleys are often portrayed as poor in wealth, but rich in heart. That heart was trampled on by Pettigrew's continued presence. And in the end, even when caught, he begged not for forgiveness, but for his life. Dumbledore himself reflects on the danger of such men. You place too much importance on the so-called purity of blood, he tells Fudge. You fail to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be. And Pettigrew is the counterweight to that. He was born ordinary, raised among friends, given every chance to be good. And he chose betrayal. The reader is left to grapple with that disquieting realization that sometimes evil survives because it hides in love's blind spot. That comfort can dull suspicion, that the warmest houses can shelter the coldest hearts. It's a truth that echoes louder in the pages than on the screen. Because in the end, Scabbers was not a rat. He was a mirror, showing us how even the smallest cowardice, when left unchecked, can burrow into our lives and wait, silent, patient, and poisonous. Number 26. Madame Marsh, the gossip of Diagon Alley. In the bustling heart of Diagon Alley, where windows flicker with magical light, and the air smells faintly of fresh parchment and dragon liver, there exists a corner of magic that never made it to the silver screen. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, a seemingly insignificant character breathes life into the hidden rhythms of the wizarding world. She's not a member of the Order, nor a Death Eater. She doesn't teach at Hogwarts or fight in any battle. Yet her presence is a whisper that echoes through the heart of the magical society. Her name is Madame Marsh, or as known in the English version, Madame Marsh, the ever-present, ever-curious and ever-gossiping witch who appears briefly but vividly during Harry's stay at the Leaky Cauldron. It is through her chatter that we, the readers, come to understand the pulse of the wizarding public in that fearful summer when Sirius Black, the so-called mass murderer and escapee from Azkaban, becomes the center of every whispered conversation. While the films bypass this atmospheric moment entirely, the book gives us the gift of eavesdropping on Madame Marsh's rambling thoughts. revealing a world that is fearful, uncertain, and desperate for answers. She is not just a passing name, she is a living embodiment of what ordinary witches and wizards fear, hope for, and suspect. When Harry arrives at the leaky cauldron, having fled from the Dursleys after accidentally inflating Aunt Marge, he does not immediately face danger. Instead, he finds an odd sort of sanctuary in a dingy London pub filled with life and movement. Here, in these pages, Rowling lets us rest with Harry, not in silence, but in noise. Madame Marsh becomes part of this fabric, a regular presence in the bar, flapping her lips about Sirius Black's escape with a mixture of horror and titillation. She isn't an aura, she isn't wise or restrained, but her voice feels authentic. It is the voice of the crowd. She was saying that Sirius Black had been sighted not far from Diagon Alley, and that she thought he was trying to make his way to Voldemort, the narration tells us. It's not a central revelation, but it's real. It's how people learn in this world, not through headlines, but through the pub gossip. Madame Marsh becomes quite literally a mirror of wizarding society's paranoia, and Rowling uses her precisely for that effect. She's described with vivid simplicity, often wrapped in layers of shawls, eyes narrowed behind spectacles, always with an opinion. The leaky cauldron's atmosphere is thick with characters like her, who drop names and stir panic, adding to the texture of the magical world. Madame Marsh is the sort of witch who insists she knows someone who knows someone in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She is, by all measures, a minor character, yet her importance lies in the emotional weather she brings into a scene. It is because of her that we feel the tension in the air, long before Harry meets the night bus or hears about the Grim. Before Remus Lupin, before Buckbeak's trial, before the Time Turner, there is Madame Marsh, folding the anxiety of the wizarding world into her steaming cup of tea, and she shares it all with anyone who will listen. In doing so, she becomes a kind of narrative device, allowing readers to catch the undercurrents of fear that run beneath the headlines of the Daily Prophet. Her significance is in how she colours the atmosphere. Sirius Black is not just a headline or a fugitive, he becomes a monster in the public mind because of witches like her. "They say he's mad," she whispers, or at least that's the kind of statement she'd make in her gossipy tone, setting off the imaginations of everyone around her. And her mutterings stick with Harry. They help build the legend of Sirius as a dangerous, unpredictable figure, a man who, in the minds of ordinary folk, could appear out of the shadows at any moment. This is what the films lose, not a major plot point, but a heartbeat. In omitting Madame Marsh and the others like her, the adaptation skips over a chance to show how the magical world feels. It becomes cleaner, neater, and ultimately a bit more hollow, because without these voices, without these mundane moments, the stakes don't feel so deeply rooted in the world outside Hogwarts. Madame Marsh is how we know the wizarding world is watching, whispering, and worrying. She is how we know that Voldemort's shadow, though not yet returned, still lingers. The contrast is especially stark when compared to how Sirius is introduced in the film, through the newspaper, through Cornelius Fudge, through visuals. These tools are effective, yes, but they lack the intimacy of a witch speaking over her butterbeer in a candlelit pub. In the book, Madame Marsh's presence reminds us that even in peace, the wizarding world is never far from fear, that gossip has teeth, and that the past, particularly Voldemort's reign, has left scars in every home and pub and shop. Madame Marsh does not return in future books with any grand role. She doesn't become a surprise ally or a spy. She remains a background character, one of many used by Rowling to populate the world with believable people, and yet her absence in the films is deeply felt by those who remember her, because she is not just a character, she is context, she is the proof that the world beyond Hogwarts is still spinning, full of nerves and stories and misunderstandings. It's worth remembering that Rowling often weaves vital exposition into the words of seemingly unimportant people. Think of Arabella Figg, who seems like a loony neighbour until suddenly she isn't, or Mundungus Fletcher, whose shady behaviour hides deeper loyalties. Madame Marsh doesn't get such a dramatic turn. but she operates in the same way, delivering truth laced with rumor. Her chatter isn't always accurate, but it shapes perception, and perception, in this world, matters. Through her, we also understand the power of misinformation. Madame Marsh believes, as many do, that Sirius Black is a dangerous, deranged criminal trying to reunite with Voldemort. She is wrong, of course, but no one can blame her. The Ministry believes the same. Her gossip reflects the narrative the government wants to maintain, and so even in her error, Madame Marsh is a victim of manipulation. Her words become echoes of Fudge's fear, Dumbledore's silence, and the Daily Prophet's slant. And herein lies a deeper layer of significance. Madame Marsh is what happens when a society is told to fear without explanation. She embodies the panic that creeps into corners and homes. She is the voice of those who do not have the whole story, and yet feel compelled to speak. Her presence at the leaky cauldron reminds us that Voldemort's legacy is not measured just in battles and deaths, but in anxiety and half-truths passed from mouth to mouth. When Harry sits and listens, he learns more than he realizes. He understands that the world views Sirius as a monster. He sees how fear can take root in casual conversation, and the reader too feels that shift. What makes Madame Marsh's role so compelling is that she doesn't just tell us what's happening, she shows us how people react. She gives us tone, emotion, doubt. She paints the edges of the story in dread. There is an artistry in how Rowling does this. She never overstates Madame Marsh's presence. She is there, then gone, like a breeze carrying cold news. But that breeze lingers. And when we reach the end of the book and discover the truth, that Sirius is not a villain, but a wrongly imprisoned man, we look back on Madame Marsh with a different eye. She wasn't evil, she was misled, and that realization deepens our understanding of the magical world as a place where justice can falter and where even good people can carry falsehoods. In her own small way, Madame Marsh adds to the tragedy of Sirius Black. She represents all those who cheered when he was imprisoned, who slept better, thinking the villain was locked away. Her gossip is harmless only on the surface. Beneath, it reinforces a lie that cost Sirius 12 years of his life. And that's what makes her so effective. She doesn't mean to harm, but her words are part of the cage. This detail, like so many in the books, is easy to overlook, especially when smoothed over by the faster pace of film. But to the reader, she is unforgettable, because in her we see how easily history can be shaped by rumor, how reputations can be destroyed not by evidence, but by whispers in pubs and sidelong glances. Madame Marsh, in a few scenes, teaches us about narrative power, and so while she never fights a Dementor or breaks a curse, Madame Marsh is a vital thread in the tapestry of Prisoner of Azkaban. She is proof that even the quietest characters can carry immense narrative weight. Her absence in the films is not a failure of adaptation, but a reminder of what books can do best: create worlds where every voice, however small, matters. Number 27. Arthur Weasley's warnings about Sirius. Of all the quiet, almost hidden moments buried within the pages of J.K. Rowling's third novel, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, few carry the same weight of emotional depth and foreshadowing as Arthur Weasley's private conversation with Harry. The film, in its rush toward darker atmospheres and faster pacing, sacrifices this powerful scene to a brief warning. But in the book, it is a moment of true parental concern, one of the clearest instances where Mr. Weasley steps not only into his role as a father, but also as a protector and mentor to Harry. This episode, omitted from the movie, stands as a quiet but profound testament to Arthur's love for the boy who had already lost so much. Arthur Weasley's anxiety about Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban is not a surface-level concern. Unlike many wizards who see Sirius simply as a dangerous criminal, Arthur knows the deeper implications of his flight. He knows that Sirius was not just any prisoner, he was a man tied directly to the downfall of the Potters. The wizarding world believes that Sirius betrayed James and Lily, leading to their deaths, and that now, perhaps fueled by guilt or madness, He's coming for their son. Mr. Weasley carries this knowledge like a burden. It is not just fear, it is dread. And it is this dread that drives him to pull Harry aside at the leaky cauldron, away from the noise, the shopping, and even Molly's concerned eyes. What makes this moment exceptional is how carefully Arthur chooses his words. He does not want to panic Harry. He does not want to sound like the rest of the magical community, chasing shadows and rumours, but he feels a duty to prepare Harry for the danger. Arthur is not Albus Dumbledore. He does not speak in riddles or cryptic warnings. He's a man of practical wisdom, and so he gives Harry the truth in the clearest terms he can manage. In that moment, he becomes the parent Harry doesn't have. "Harry, swear to me you won't go looking for black," he says, not as an order, but as a plea. There is something deeply human in this plea. Arthur Weasley knows what it's like to fear for one's children. He has 7 of his own after all, and Harry, who spends his summers in the Burrow, has come to be seen as an honorary son. Arthur's concern is not that Harry will act recklessly because he's foolish, but because he's brave. The kind of reckless bravery that cost his parents their lives. That's what Arthur fears most. "You might not care," he says gently, "but your parents would have done everything to keep you alive." In this line lies the heart of the scene, a reminder that survival is not cowardice, that caution is not weakness. This is not just a warning about a dangerous man. This is Arthur trying to teach Harry something that Dumbledore himself wrestles with later, the value of life, the price of sacrifice, and the legacy of love. The world is preparing Harry to be a martyr. Arthur, in this scene, is begging him to choose to live. And in doing so, Rowling gives the reader a glimpse into a kind of quiet courage not often glorified in stories about magic and war, the courage to protect without applause, to worry without reward. What makes this scene even more significant is the atmosphere around it. It takes place in the leaky cauldron, a place of transition between the Muggle and magical worlds, between safety and the unknown. Harry is on the cusp of returning to Hogwarts, a place that has always been his true home. But this time he's not just going back to classes and Quidditch. He's going back under the shadow of a mass murderer, under the watch of Dementors who patrol the grounds. Mr. Weasley is not only warning Harry about Sirius, he is warning him about the world. A world that does not protect children, no matter how magical they are. This small conversation also serves as a mirror for the larger themes of the book. Prisoner of Azkaban is not a story about good versus evil in the traditional sense. It is a story about truth, about the things we believe and how those beliefs can be manipulated. Arthur believes in what he's been told, that Sirius is a traitor and a killer. And yet in his concern he gives Harry something even more powerful than information. He gives him the right to know. He treats him not as a child but as a young man with agency. That choice, giving Harry the truth, becomes a catalyst for much of what follows. The absence of this moment in the film is not just a small cut. It removes a layer of complexity from both Harry and Arthur. In the book, we see Harry absorbing the information, not in panic, but in quiet determination. He begins to understand that the world expects him to be the boy who lived, but that his safety is still a very real concern for the people who care about him. He begins to realize that love sometimes looks like a warning, and Arthur, for all his eccentricity and fascination with Muggles, becomes something much more here. He becomes a voice of reason in a world that is starting to crack. It is important to note how Rowling builds Arthur's character up to this point. He is often shown as kind, bumbling, good-natured, but here he is serious, deliberate, and painfully honest. The quote, "You think your parents would have wanted you to die rather than betray your friends," resonates deeply. It's not just about Sirius, it's about James and Lily, about their sacrifice. Arthur is trying to make Harry see that their deaths should not be romanticized, that surviving them is not betrayal, it's their legacy. Harry's reaction is equally telling. He does not shout or cry. He listens, he thinks, and that, perhaps, is what Arthur was hoping for all along. Not obedience, but understanding, a moment of maturity in a life that has forced Harry to grow up too fast. There is no spectacle here, no grand revelation, no magic spell, just a boy and a man standing quietly in a pub, talking about death, loyalty, and life. This scene also echoes later in the book, when Harry hears the truth about Sirius Black, that he is not the traitor, that Peter Pettigrew, the man everyone believed dead, is the true betrayer. And in that moment, the gravity of Arthur's warning returns. Because it wasn't misplaced, it was misinformed. Arthur believed in Sirius's guilt because the whole world did, but his care for Harry was never a lie, it was sincere. And when the truth comes out, Harry does not feel betrayed by Arthur. He remembers the warmth behind the words, the concern, not the accusation. There is something profoundly moving in that. It's easy to write adults who are either mentors or obstacles in children's literature. Arthur is neither. He is a man doing his best in a world that is often cruel, confusing, and full of shadows. His warning was wrong in facts, but right in feeling. And it is that feeling that grounds Harry, that helps him distinguish between what people believe and what is true. This is also one of the few scenes where we see Arthur operate apart from Molly. He's not being balanced by her sternness or softened by her presence. He is, in this scene, his own man, and that man is deeply empathetic, intelligent, and responsible. It adds depth to a character often overshadowed by the flashier personalities around him. Arthur is not loud, but he is firm. He is not flashy, but he is wise. And in this moment, he is unforgettable. The fact that the filmmakers reduced this scene to a single sentence, "Don't go looking for Black," does a disservice not just to Arthur, but to the entire emotional landscape of the book. It flattens a nuanced moment into a warning without warmth. It makes Arthur seem like just another adult fearful of danger, instead of a man who deeply cares for a boy that is not even his own. The omission weakens the sense of found family that runs like a heartbeat through the Weasley household and through Harry's story. For readers who know the book, this scene remains vivid because it feels real. It is not about magic. It is about human connection, about the ache of responsibility, about the impossible task of keeping someone safe in a world where evil wears familiar faces. Arthur does not have all the answers. He only has love, and sometimes that's all a person can offer, and sometimes that is enough. Even Sirius later becomes a mirror for Arthur's concern. Where Arthur pleads for Harry's caution, Sirius eventually fuels Harry's bravery. But it is Arthur's voice that comes first. That lays the foundation. That says, "You matter. Your life matters. Don't throw it away for ghosts and grudges." It's a voice of wisdom that echoes long after the book ends. Arthur's warning, though based on a misunderstanding, carries a truth deeper than any prophecy. The value of life is measured by how fiercely others want to protect it. His concern is not for headlines or glory. It is for the simple continuation of a young boy's life. For laughter, learning, and late-night talks in the Burrows' kitchen. For a future that James and Lily can no longer ensure, but that Arthur, quietly, tries to guard. This hidden treasure of The Prisoner of Azkaban is not about plot. It's about heart. About how, in a world full of dementors and dark lords, one man still chooses to pull a boy aside and speak truth with trembling hands. That moment, for those who read the book, is unforgettable. And for Harry, whether he realizes it then or not, it's a turning point. A whisper in the storm that tells him, "You are loved, you are not alone, and you are worth saving." Number 28. How Black Entered Gryffindor Tower. Of all the mysteries and misdirections that swirl through the pages of Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban, few are as quietly compelling as the moment when Sirius Black infiltrates Gryffindor Tower. The film adaptation brushes over the detail, hinting only that the notorious escapee has somehow made his way into the castle's heart. But in the book, J.K. Rowling weaves the event with subtlety and suspense, offering a revelation that not only enriches the plot but also touches on the deeper themes of trust, shame, and personal growth. It is here that readers discover a hidden truth, one that only the page reveals in full. It begins with an atmosphere of unease. Hogwarts is on high alert. Sirius Black, the first known escapee from the impregnable fortress of Azkaban, is not only at large but has, incredibly, breached the castle walls. Fat Lady, the enchanted portrait who guards Gryffindor Tower, has been slashed open in a frenzy of claw and rage. Her frame lies torn, her canvas ripped. She refuses to return to her post, and for a time, students are forced to sleep in the Great Hall, huddled together under the watchful eyes of teachers and prefects. The security of Hogwarts has been violated and the source remains unseen. At first, the focus is on the violence of the act. The assumption is that Sirius Black, driven mad from years in Azkaban, broke in with brute force, perhaps by dark magic or raw determination. But that's only part of the story. The true means by which he enters Gryffindor Tower is neither magical nor violent. It's human, mundane, even pitiful in its simplicity. It's a forgotten scrap of parchment, lost by a boy too often overlooked, Neville Longbottom. Neville, clumsy and well-meaning, has always struggled with the little things. His memory is poor. He misplaces books, wands, and passwords. McGonagall, strict but fair, has always treated him with a mix of sternness and sympathy. In this case, she gives him a stern warning about writing passwords down, but Neville, desperate not to forget them again, jots them down on a piece of paper. He keeps it in his robes, meaning to guard it, but he loses it. He doesn't even realize it's missing until it's far too late. That piece of parchment becomes the key, not a metaphorical key, but a literal one. On it are written the passwords for Gryffindor Tower, every single one, as they change frequently for security. It is, in essence, a skeleton key to the student's most private refuge. Sirius finds it. We are not told exactly how, only that he comes upon it somehow, a matter left to sinister implication. But once he has it, he doesn't need magic. He doesn't need violence. He simply walks in. "There's something I've never told you about the night Harry's parents died," said Dumbledore. "Sirius Black was the Potters' secret keeper. He betrayed them to Voldemort." This line, heavy with misdirection, sets the tone for the kind of betrayal that Hogwarts believes Black is capable of. So when it's revealed that he has slipped into Gryffindor Tower, the assumption is that he's using dark spells or hidden passageways. No one suspects a lost scrap of paper lying unclaimed in some dusty corner of the common room or hallway. The scene plays out like a gothic whodunit. When the Fat Lady is attacked, the entire school is thrown into a frenzy, but it is only later that we learn the actual method of entry, not a small moment in the book, but a significant one. Neville had lost the list of passwords. Sirius Black got in using it. The horror of the event is doubled by its ordinariness. There was no grand enchantment, no confrontation. The barrier fell because a boy was careless. This moment is pivotal not because of what it says about Sirius. We already know he is clever and determined, but because of what it reveals about Neville. Until now, Neville has been little more than a comedic figure, a symbol of Hogwarts' awkward underdogs, but here, his mistake has real consequences. His lapse in judgment places the entire house at risk. It is a sobering moment, and for Neville, a deeply humiliating one. McGonagall's reaction is swift and harsh. "I will be speaking to Professor Dumbledore. I am very disappointed in you, Longbottom." She strips him of his privilege to know the passwords and enforces a rule that he must be escorted in and out of the common room. For a boy who has always tried so hard to belong, it is a crushing blow. He is now literally and symbolically on the outside, peering in. This punishment is not just disciplinary, it is character-defining. For the rest of the book, we see Neville become more serious, more determined. He begins to seek courage in other places to grow into the boy who, in the final book, will stand alone against Voldemort's army, wielding the sword of Gryffindor. This early mistake, this shame, is the soil in which that bravery begins to take root.